Welcome to 3 Books with Neil Pasricha, where each episode we uncover the 3 most formative books of an inspiring individual. Hey everybody, this is Neil Pasricha, and welcome back to chapter 145 of 3 Books. You are listening to the world's only podcast by and for book lovers, writers, makers, sellers, and librarians. We have an incredible 3-booker community, coast to coast, overseas, all over the world, reading your voicemails from 1-833-READ-A-LOT, your letters that you send in, which I love, which I think of as the real pride of the show, honestly. And we talk with interesting people around the world about which 3 books most changed their lives, speaking to people like Nick Sweetman, who was our guest in chapter 144, David Sedaris, who was our guest in chapter 18, which we just recently released, and James Fry, author of A Million Little Pieces, who we also just released as a classic chapter, every new moon, every full moon from 2018 to 2040, 333 chapters. This is a joy and a pleasure and a treat. I feel super lucky to be here, to be talking to all of you. So we always talk about one of our values, and then we read a letter, and then we talk about our guest, who, by the way, today, it's a fascinating gentleman named Lindyman. Lindyman. His real name is Paul Skallas, but he goes by Lindyman online to his 129,144 followers as of right now, where he applies this heuristic of the Lindy Effect, popularized by Nassim Taleb's 2012 book, Antifragile. But the longer something's been popular, the longer it's going to stay popular. That length of life to this point is one heuristic to see how long something's going to last. The longest Broadway musical is probably going to last longer than the one that just opened, and on it goes. So Lindyman has popularized this ancient wisdom being applied to kind of modern scenarios. More on him in just a second. So, like I said, we always start with the value. And so the value I want to talk about for chapter 145 is you have the right to dip, the right to skip, and the right to quit. I think so many of us, when it comes to reading, we're taught with the sort of, industrial revolution invented education system that you must start a book, read it from front to back, and then finish it. If you are assigned The Great Gatsby in 10th grade, or Lord of the Flies in 10th grade, or Hamlet in 10th grade, those were the 3 books I was assigned, you got to read them all. And you might even analyze them chapter by chapter with discussion groups or book reports. And so you kind of are taught to read that way. However, if you plumb the deep archives of your mind for how you flipped through picture books when you were a young lad or lassie, you just flipped through picture books. Sometimes you ate the picture book. Sometimes you started at the back or read them upside down. And the book was an extension of your curiosity. You certainly felt comfortable, I think, to dip into them, to skip past certain parts and quit certain parts. So many people over the 7 years now I've been running 3 books have said to me, I have a problem quitting books, or I can't quit, or I have a thing in my head or my mind that tells me I have to read the whole book. We got to drop that. We got to drop that baggage, because the problem is when you get stuck in a book that is suddenly uninteresting or becomes uninteresting to you, you let it sort of sit and fossilify and atrophy on your bedside table, and that book becomes a brick that blocks all future books, right? Like, you can't get another book into your system until this one's gone. And so that's why I think that we as readers, in order to read better, in order to read, more just in general, we have to remember we have the right to dip, the right to skip, the right to quit. Like Lindyman's 3 books were a 44-page pamphlet of aphorisms, which were wonderful to skip through and dip through. Then a gigantic 423-page book, Antifragile, by Nassim Taleb. You can kind of predict that one coming. And then I won't reveal it right now, but then a 1,200-page book. The 1,200-page book was interesting. I have lots of folded pages, lots of highlight pages, but to think that I read that cover to cover would be very false. I read the table of contents. Then I read the index. Then I jumped through some sections I was interested in. Then I kind of started from the beginning again. And that was a wonderful way to eat that. I'm not going to eat a slice of pizza from the tip to the crust every time. Sometimes I go for that bite of green olive and pepperoni hanging on the side. You know what I mean? So you got to follow your interest. That is a better way to read. It helps you read more, helps you read better, and helps you, not judge yourself when you quit a book. It's fine to quit a book. You're not quitting it. You're just making space for the gem that follows. All right. Let's remember that. That's the value for chapter 145. Now, the letter, so many good letters coming in these days. If you have a thought on the show, please leave it as a review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or a comment on YouTube. I read them all. I read one at the start of every single show. Like this one from Meredith Fraser. I have a daughter, Gracie, she writes, who is a senior in high school. And for the past decade, you've been a huge part of our life, unbeknownst to you. After we moved from Kentucky to Florida 11 years ago, I took a job as a program manager at a nonprofit. I worked with after-school programs. I brought STEM into low-income areas. I always talked about the importance of embracing failure as part of a STEM education. So much of science and engineering is figuring out ways something doesn't work before you have success. At the same time, I was starting a professional library of books that educational professionals could use to embrace failure, but also find wonder in every day. Needless to say, your books were part of that collection. I started with the Book of Awesome, then I started speaking at educational after-school conferences, and I always mentioned your books, and I soon downloaded the app of Awesome on my phone. My daughter and I would check the app religiously every day on the way to school. We were sad when it went away. We decided to start our own list, and now, a decade later, our list of awesome things has been stored on 3 iterations of cell phones and now contains hundreds of awesome things, most of them rooted in a specific moment in time. That list is truly one of my most prized possessions. As a graduation gift, I am making my daughter a book from her own awesome things and adding some pictures with the memories. I would also love to give her a signed copy of the Book of Awesome, as it has had such a huge impact on how we both see the world every day. Thank you for being part of our lives for over a decade. From Meredith Fraser, Fraysure, who said I could read her letter on the air. And of course, when I read people's letters or their comments or their letters or their reviews, I do always mail them a signed book to say thanks. So no worries. The signed Book of Awesome is on the way as a graduation present. Side note, the app of Awesome was super fun. Bonnable Labs in Australia reached out to me. They were fans of 1000awesomethings.com, and they made the app for free. And kudos to them for making a free app that popped up with a new awesome thing every day. For like the next 4 generations of iPhones, they just like updated it for free and kept it going. But then eventually apps need maintenance and time and effort, and it just sort of faded away. And I didn't, I knew a lot of people liked the app and were using it, but I wasn't in a position at that time to sort of spend a big amount of money and make a big app, especially because I had the blog, the books, the calendars. I was like, there's lots of ways to get these. Lots of them are free to get these awesome things. And even today now, 16 years later, oh my gosh, is it 16 years? 17 years now. After starting 1000 Awesome Things in 2008, I still to this day write a brand new awesome thing every single day. And I email it out to a loyal legion of global fans. I post them on Facebook still, facebook.com/Pasricha. And I post them on Instagram /Pasricha as my Instagram story every day. So if you want my awesome thing, it's still going out to something like a couple 100,000 people every single night. I do worry about running out. I mean, like 17 years now, it's a lot, plus the books and the calendars and everything. But somehow, like always, people keep sending them to me. When people do, I credit them with their name. I think I'm writing probably 75-80% myself still. And then 20-25% are coming from people around the world. So it's been a joy that I've been able to do this. And my list of awesome things is also a prized possession. Keep your list of awesome things sacred and close. Well, one guy that keeps lots of lists is, of course, Mr. Lindyman, Lindyman. In the 2012 book, Antifragile by Nassim Taleb, Mr. Taleb, a statistician and scholar, created something called the Lindy Effect. He wrote, for the perishable, every additional day in life translates to a shorter additional life expectancy, kind of like me and you and the cheese in our fridge, or the milk in our fridge. But for the non-perishable, every additional day may imply a longer life expectancy. For example, a play that has run on Broadway for 5 years will likely stick around for 5 more. And he says, in Antifragile, the robustness of an item is proportional to its life. Well, Paul Skallas, a Chicago-born technology lawyer, really latched on to the popularity of this heuristic, and he came to apply it to a broad range of things, including, health. He's like, don't use mouthwash. It kills good and bad bacteria and actually creates higher cancer rates, but floss. Poking stuff out of your teeth has been around for thousands of years, right? So this heuristic is a really helpful way to look at the world. And I have subscribed to the Lindy newsletter. He writes 2 to 3 long form pieces every week. You'll hear in the interview him explain how exactly he does this, which I find interesting of itself. Focus and time is kind of the shorthand. And he applies this heuristic to so many different ways. He applies it to cities, to urban planning. He applies it to dating. He applies it to medical trends, health influencers. And his original thinking really knows no bounds. I was fascinated to read a New York Times profile of Paul Skallas, who goes by Lindyman, which has the title The Lindy Way of Living. And it was a very popular New York Times profile. So I reached out to him, and Paul very kindly agreed to be on the show. He gave me 3 very good, very interesting, formative books. We talk about them at length, along with a lot of other unique and interesting ideas, like what's happening in the world on about 12 different levels. He's a big, dynamic, kind of confident, outspoken, and gregarious mind that reminds me of Tim Urban, our guest in chapter 22 of the show. So if you like to have your brain stretched like taffy and provoked with unusual and interesting thoughts, this is the chapter for you. Please enjoy chapter 145 with the one and only Lindyman. Let's flip the page and get into it now. You've tweeted 16 times in the last 24 hours by my count.
Did I? I don't.
Yeah, 129,144 followers. And the last one I grabbed before I came downstairs to record with you is you tweeted, "Not worried, it'll grow back."
That's somebody said they're going to eat my liver because I criticized some architecture, and I said it'll just grow back, right? But
yeah, I like that you engage with your haters. This is like a new trend. Brian Johnson's always like tweet at replying his haters with like, a mean-spirited comeback. Not mean-spirited, but like he kind of fights fire with fire.
I guess your haters follow your work more closely than the people who actually like you. So it takes a lot more energy to hate someone.
Oh, that's interesting. And then at 11:10 a.m. this morning, you tweeted, "The end result of 15 years of identity politics, in all in caps, and DEI is raising white consciousness in America, period. Enter. Congrats."
Yeah, I mean, that's what it looks like to me. What happened with a lot of that Trump just rolled into office with Elon Musk and Bezos and this sort of white working class wave. He kind of and then also some Latin wave, and it just seems like the reaction to the woke movement was this other group of people who were mostly race blind recently. Were kind of the ones who were the odd man out of all this, like pushing this certain political agenda. I don't think the woke movement is like necessarily evil or like.
How do you define woke movement?
I would say just like preferential treatment to people who are maybe not part of the majority population, trying to help out certain groups, but. Mm-hmm. But in the end result, I think this other group said, well, if we're the one group being sort of excluded or perceived that way. So all of a sudden now we're going to look around and, essentially that's what Elon Musk has been tweeting about the last 6 to 8 months to a year.
You're saying that all those people that he was surrounded by when he's inaugurated, and we're speaking on January 21st, 2025, and so his inauguration was literally yesterday.
Right.
And Biden's last day was, I guess, the day before. So that's the context for your tweets. But you're saying like everyone in the front row is all white consciousness.
Yeah, no, I just think he brought up this group that may not have been as racially conscious maybe 20, 30 years ago, but is now. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's a reaction to cultural trend that's been going on for a while that's unexpected. And I think unexpected things you have to watch out for, especially when you're pushing certain agendas.
Yeah. This is why I love your thoughts, because they kind of zig and zag. Because then yesterday at around lunchtime, this is around when we're speaking, so I'm going to get to your 24-hour timeline here. You tweeted, I thought this was interesting. You tweeted, and by the way, 125,000 people have liked or shared this thing or viewed it. You said, Biden's presidency felt intense, very Roman Empire-esque, opens the border completely for 4 years, lets an ally commit atrocities and genocide, finances a small country's military against a huge neighbor, prices on homes and food double in a span of 18 months, confusion over succession and last-minute replacement.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like something you'd read like a Roman emperor happens 2,000 years ago. Just these massive changes that foreign policy with, utilizing allies, with Middle Eastern sort of exterminationist war going on that seems to not be in line with Geneva Conventions or anything. And
you're talking about
Gaza and then this like major serious war in Ukraine and Russia where hundreds of thousands of people are dying. And then at home you have these prices are doubling for homes. Coffee's $8. I'm not saying it's his fault or he kind of engineered all this, but I'm just saying it felt like a very historic times. And it felt like the United States wasn't just a nation. We were really like an empire, and things were happening. And it just felt like very serious to me. And it's kind of an underrated presidency. And I think it ended with Biden doing all these like pardons, especially proactive pardons where nobody, did anything wrong, but he's still pardoning them. So nobody can prosecute them, like Fauci or his family. Just felt like an odd, non-normal presidency.
Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that, because the tweet the last tweet I was going to quote, you had tweeted at 12:17 p.m. yesterday. The presidential pardon is fascinating. It's a holdover from the English monarchy that the founders explicitly gave to the president. No other democratic leader has this type of discretion. There's no congressional veto of it. It's interesting seeing Biden really flex it like no other president before has. It will play a bigger role in the future as politics get more divided. Constant jailing and setting free political opponents. And of course, you tweeted that before today. Donald Trump just freed all the January 6th insurrectionists via presidential pardon. Like the last thing the other guy does is pardon. The first thing the new guy does is pardon.
Yeah, it's kind of a serious kind of power. Like there's other countries have their presidents have pardoning power, but there's checks and balances. They have to go through their Senate, or they have to go through the judicial arena, or they can't give out proactive pardons. But the American president has this almost king-like power where it hasn't been seriously used. I mean, I think it was used with Nixon. I think Gerald Ford was Nixon. I think generally some presidents pardon their friends after the administration or some tokens. But now I think it's in play as more of kind of like a serious executive maneuver that we haven't seen before. And as politics get more divided, it's going to become it might become weird. Like somebody might go to jail and then somebody get pardons 4 years later, and that thousands of people this might happen to.
Right. And we've seen that in history over time. Someone gets exiled, then somebody brings him back. Nelson Mandela goes to jail and then he is freed. Yeah. Malcolm X or Martin Luther King. We've seen this over and over. But what you do is you point out that Biden has pardoned over 8,000 people, and the next closest president is like 2,000 or sub.
Yeah.
You, as you always do so wonderfully, and this is your name, Lindyman, put it in a long-term historical context with the British monarchy or, a Roman Empire. And that long-term historical contextualization is, we're going to come back to that over and over again. And with your 3 books, which I'm very excited to dive into. I read all 3 of them to the extent I could. Pattern Language.
It's a big one.
It was 1,187 pages, but I did my best. And so I love the books you've chose. I can't wait to talk about them. And interestingly, Paul /Lindyman. I'm going to stick with Lindyman. The way I met you, as I think a lot of people did probably, is your June 17th, 2021 big feature profile in the New York Times, which was called The Lindy Way of Living. And so I thought before we get into your 3 quotes about reading that I picked out, then your 3 formative books. I thought I might just read back to you some paragraphs from that feature, and just to see if now, with the benefit of another 1,000 days, another 3.5 years since then, if these things still reflect your current beliefs. Also, maybe they misquoted you back then. Back then. So the subheadline is: a technology lawyer named Paul Skallas argues we should be gleaning more wisdom from antiquity. I guess you're 40 now. If you were 36 then.
Yeah.
Did you do a 40th birthday?
No, I think birthdays are best when they're like when you're really young and when you're really old. It's like a bathtub distribution. And in the middle, like we'll just get to the, when we really appreciate it, then we can celebrate it.
That is a great line. And then you say, he's an evangelist for wisdom derived from the distant past, like, say, skip the mouthwash. And then they quote you, everyone tells you to do it. Your breath is clean. It feels like the right thing, said Skallas during a Zoom call from Deauville, France, where he moved from New York last fall to ride out the pandemic. And then you read about higher cancer rates for people who use it, how it destroys good and bad bacteria. And you go, you're right. There was no mouthwash back then.
Yeah, so some advancements like for bad breath actually can harm, destroy all the good and bad bacteria in your mouth, and it's something I don't use. And I'm not against modern medicine. I think there's great advancements. Brushing your teeth and toothpaste is great. It's just you have to watch out for things that are modern that may disrupt something, a natural process.
So mouthwash is not Lindy,
right?
We can say, right? But we can say that like floss is Lindy,
right? Flossing,
because it's probably an extension of like sticking your fingers in your teeth or a stick in your teeth,
right?
Toothpicks are very Lindy,
yes,
yeah. But toothpaste or fluoride,
right? But
because I'll tell you straight up, Paul. I had burning mouth syndrome last year for 6 months. I went to multiple doctors and dentists. At the end of it all, turns out I was allergic to an ingredient in Sensodyne toothpaste.
Oh, okay. I think when you do a Lindy analysis, you also, how old is toothpaste now? It's over a little bit over 100 years, and generally we're not seeing any problems from it, or we, with cigarettes, that came and went in the 20th century. Although nicotine seems to always come back now with Zyn patches or Zyn.
David Chappelle was on SNL doing a 17-minute monologue 2 days ago, smoking cigarettes the whole time. So it's not like it's gone. Right. But to your point,
we know what it does.
Well, yeah, and there's a heuristic here at play, which is the longer something's lasted, the longer it's likely to last in the future.
Right.
And that is, as you've helped popularize and Nassim Taleb has helped coin, and of course the famous, I think it was the comedians back at Lindy's Diner in the 60s helped create, there's this Lindy effect at play.
Right. It's a great heuristic for examining things that have been around. If you want to be super safe, don't eat food that's less than 500 years old or liquids less than 1,000 years old.
So no more whey protein.
Yeah, probably. The pathways matter too. You have these people taking supplements all the time where it's this mega dose of this distilled ingredient that we'd never really had. And I think they've done, studies on B12 supplementation, and it leads to lung cancer in certain people. So, yeah, I mean, you're not saying that
Brian Johnson famously went on ripamycin for 5 years and told all his ardent supporters to do it, and then went off of it saying, oh my gosh, after 5 years of analysis, I realized it dramatically lowers longevity. Yeah,
I mean, he just kind of looks at a study, and then if the study says it's beneficial, he just takes it and puts it in his protocol. But I don't think he's actually looking at, we don't have studies on a lot of the stuff that he's doing for long-term use, which is, so it could be good, in the studies for the year or two that they tested it. But over the lifetime of a person, they don't have studies for that yet. So I think what he does is he mixes in a lot of Lindy applicable, exercise every day, try to get to a hunter-gatherer type movement, which is very important, which most people don't have or don't get into a day. I think he eats mostly vegetarian. He tries to get enough sleep, doesn't eat right before bed, because digestion.
He only eats from 8 to 11 a.m.
Right. So digestion interrupts good sleep. All these are like pretty good Lindy tested ways. And then he'll just like take out his blood plasma and replace it with like I forgot what he replaced some substance.
I thought it was his son's blood.
No, he did that too, but he actually replaced all his plasma with some other substance. I can't albuterine. I can't remember the name of it, but I mean he'll just do things that are little. And I think it's gonna. His protocol is going to get crazier in the future. I think you might start like replacing organs. But generally, so I think he's mixing in a lot of, I said it's not really a health movement. It's a longevity movement. And there's two different things, which is you're taking risks that nobody else has, done before. And you kind of have to watch out for that because, body's a complex system. We already have foods and type of movement patterns that we know are healthy. But if you want to really extend lifespan to 120, 140 or never die, you're going to have to take extreme measures that come with side effects that we don't know what's going to happen. So,
and it's amazing your commentary on the health industry and the health influence industry, because it's a really giant bulbous thing in most of our faces every day. Like I can't go on YouTube without it starting with a diet ad.
Everywhere.
Ozempic's on the front page of every single thing. And, the opening joke at the Golden Globes like last week is that welcome to the nation's largest gathering of Ozempic. We know things that are popular with celebrity and with wealth filters down. It always has. So like we're seeing it everywhere. It's the number one drug in the world, right? And in fact, I wasn't sure when to bring this up, but I may as well now. It's also your commentary on from March 2024, where you wrote "The Unbearable Sadness of the Health Influencer." Yeah. I love the title. I love the title. That was the one that Luigi, the alleged assassin of the United Health CEO, DM'd you about.
Right. That was I
wanted to open up the Luigi conversation. I have some notes written to provoke you to, or I can hear your perspective on it both. Well, I was just going to read the DM actually. So, because you wrote a piece about this on GQ, it of course became one of the most emailed articles on GQ. Interestingly, you announced it on Twitter. I thought in an interesting way. You said, "I've written an article for GQ, but no link provided." Yeah, I had to go Google it. You made me do like an extra second of work, and you said, you got this DM. Here's the DM from Luigi that you published to you. And by the way, Luigi, for those that don't know, no reason anyone should, he only followed like a handful of people. Like he didn't follow that many people. He followed like Tim Urban. He followed like, health influencers, some of them. He was a ripped guy. And he also paid for your newsletter, as I do. I think you have a really wonderfully interesting, unique thinking newsletter. It's wonderful. I recommend people. I know you probably have thousands and thousands of subscribers. He was a paid subscriber of your newsletter.
Yeah, he was following me, paying for the newsletter, all of it.
And he actually commented on Brian Johnson to you. It baffles me so much that anyone could possibly follow Brian Johnson. The dude just looks eerie, period. Next paragraph. I'm a fairly rational, non-superstitious person, but even when I look at the guy, it's immediately obvious he's a literal vampire. Period. Pale, gaunt, avoids the sun, dead look in his eyes, feasts on the blood of his own son. New paragraph, last paragraph. How can you be obsessed with health and longevity, but literally avoid the source of all life/energy on Earth, in brackets, the sun? ?
Yeah, I think that's a common kind of response I got from that article, or what people have. I think sort of Brian Johnson's is the leading sort of longevity.
But you didn't reply.
No, because I think he said, I'm fairly rational. And said I'm fair, which is, I don't know, it's one of those red flags you hear, like maybe you're on a date with a girl and she says, I'm a rational person. And then like the next 2 years is going to be a bad time for you. So
why is that? Why is identifying as fairly rational like a bad? I saw that line you wrote in the GQ piece. You said it's like the sign you get from somebody who's going to like be a horrible girlfriend for 2 years. And I didn't understand the connection.
I don't know. It's just, I think if you tell yourself that if you tell somebody you're rational, you might not be. It's just it's just an odd way.
It's like screaming something, just,
right.
It's just, I am calm.
Yeah, I'm calm. Right. You're not
calm. Right.
So it's just like, oh, you're not rational because you just have to tell me that. Yeah. It's just rational people don't really say that. But I think.
What percent of your DMs do you reply to?
Probably like half of them are.
Okay. Yeah. It wasn't like you ghosted him, but then when December 10th, 2024 comes out, your phone's blowing up because it comes out that he follows you.
Right.
And he's just been arrested. I mean, I'm assuming that's a pretty complex suite of emotions.
Yeah. I mean, it's, that was like that was a really weird day because it's like, does this guy have like a bag of my tweets like in his bag or something? Like, how crazy is this going to get? Because the story blew up so much. It wasn't just a normal story. It was the biggest story. It was like, well, Tim Urban tweeted, he tweeted just at first. Yeah. And then his second tweet was very much not the point of my book. Right.
Because that guy had said he loved Tim Urban's book, Tim Urban, our past guest in chapter 22. I guess you must have felt like some part of your work was an inspiration. And I'm not saying, but like to this guy who's done this really kind of outlandish act, So
yeah, I think he was just feeling. I think he was young. He's like 26 or 24. So he's in this online world of like piecing together, and he was like Ivy League student, so very smart.
Yeah, he went 2 degrees from Penn, high school valedictorian.
And so I think he's just into this. To the wellness and into questioning certain things of modern life. And, so he's into a lot of social science writers, a lot of people who are also into that world. But there's nothing I've written that sort of would, I don't know, lead someone to do anything like this. So I found it very strange because I'm very much pretty vanilla, especially when you consider what else is going on in X, especially now.
Well, yeah. I feel interestingly, like to me, it was interesting because before they caught him and identified him, you had written an email newsletter that I got, like I subscribed to your newsletter, and it was about the rise of assassination. You had pointed out, because you always do, you couch it in antiquity. You're saying historically, the elites and the aristocrats have always feared for their own safety. You're like, you had said, this is why Zuckerberg pays $32 million and has 8 security guys, and he's learning MMA. Like, when you're worth $200 billion and you're wearing a $905,000 watch to announce no more censorship on your platforms, you are well aware that there's a bit of a dynamic here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah,
and especially America, which is this exception, which is elites send their kids, they go there, they walk the streets of Manhattan, LA, go to college campuses, you're safe. Like nobody's going to kidnap you. Rich people don't really live behind these big gates like they do in other countries, which is, you got to worry about. I mean, Kim Kardashian got basically kidnapped in Paris and got robbed in a hotel room. And you generally don't see that in America. And for a lot of reasons. Number one, America's got very strong kidnapping laws. Like you're going to go at least prison for at least 20 to life for any type of kidnapping, which is
a big deal.
Yeah. And regular people in America don't necessarily hate people who are rich. Like
they achieve the American dream.
Right. And nobody's, it's just not in like the character of the country to sort of like, there's a lot of rhetoric, but just on the street, there's not a lot of people, like a South American country of like kidnapping or assassination business leaders. Yeah, there is for some presidents, and we saw with Trump recently or Reagan, but not with just like general political opponents or CEOs. So it's this exception in America, which it's this thing that might fall because it's not really Lindy, right? It's not really, the rich and powerful have.
Well, they're starting to release all these reports saying, and I feel bad for these people, but they're saying like, Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's got broken into while they're at the game. Joe Burrow's house got broken into while he was at the game.
Right.
It's like you're starting to see Elon Musk, like everyone's doubling their security. Obviously, this CEO was assassinated. So
I think with Zuckerberg is like he's like a real student of history. Like he's upset. He really reads a lot about Roman times, and get to the point was I think he might be the guy that says, "Look, I know this has happened throughout history. I have lots of security. I travel in a convoy. I train MMA literally for self-defense, not because I want to be a better person, or I need, help with exercise. He literally could be a practical measure. So, so he might see it as just, and that's why he's doing all this in a way. So, yeah, there could be a wave coming that America stops being an exception. You never really know. I mean, I think America is an interesting place. So,
do you plan to move back? I guess you do still live there.
Yeah, no, I still live there. Yeah, it's great.
And is your background American, like generationally, or?
No, my parents come from Greece. So
your parents are Greek,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So,
and my parents are India and Nairobi, Kenya, but my mom from Kenya is Indian,
right,
a generation above, before the partition. Can I go back to the article?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. No breakfast, he said. Breakfast was unknown. This is the New York Times article. Breakfast was unknown in early history. Rome, Byzantium, ancient Greece. Breakfast wasn't really a thing. Paul Skallas has written about the anti-breakfast positions of Plutarch and Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah, breakfast, like this huge breakfast of cereals, and what we think is more of like a creation of like the 150 years of marketing. Generally, you had a little bit of food, and then you go and work throughout the day, and then you'd have your first meal around lunch or a little bit before lunch, and you'd get that natural fasting, which you get the benefits of fasting. So I think. Do you do this? You're a yeah. I just
16-8 person or whatever.
Yeah, I just generally have a cup of coffee, but the croissants here are so good that sometimes it's hard to resist.
Well, it's funny. I said this to my wife, Leslie, who has been a co-host on the show a bunch of times, and to my barista. Her name is Nicole Bersafi. And both of them said, that can't be true. And Nicole said, she's from Lebanon. She's I'm Arab. The Byzantine Empire always ate breakfast. Aren't we part of antiquity? She's saying, my family goes back in Lebanon thousands of years. The imperialist nations that quote unquote influenced the way we eat didn't have any say over my culture till modern day. Breakfast has always been part of it. We have little pieces of fruit, tomatoes cut up, some cheese, a little bit of bread, a little bit of tea or Turkish coffee. She's 29. She's a coffee shop owner. Yeah. She's a writer. My wife is like, can you ask him like which parts of history you take from and which ones you don't? Because of course, yeah, you can also say you can do, so how do you? Yeah,
it's not really like a scientific thing. I mostly focus on the Greco-Roman world, Southern Europe. That's not to say that people didn't eat something in the morning. But generally it was pretty light and it wasn't this full meal. Generally,
certainly wasn't Fruit Loops.
Yeah. Or, this big spread. So yeah, it's not something that just comes up like a meal like today is. So
that's the hard part of your job is you have to kind of pick, because I've heard you say, I don't advocate bloodletting, but then of course I've seen you write it say donating blood is actually really good for you. So it's kind of like there's lessons from the past, but you also have to be the interpretation of them is challenging.
Or it's like the only, like it works, but the problem is that's the only thing they knew that works. So they would just do that with everyone. And then they would hope the placebo effect would the problem with ancient medicine is, they didn't have, it was all about prevention and if you got really seriously injured, you're in trouble. So the goal is to just, treat food as medicine, treat exercise as medicine, and just stay away from kind of really bad results. But in a way, that's the philosophy we should have today, which is you shouldn't go to the hospital unless you seriously need to, or something really bad happens, because you're gonna all of a sudden you're gonna get on pharmaceuticals, you're gonna get dependent on things, and bad things can kind of happen in clusters. So
even just that concept of preventative medicine is foreign to us today.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the model
we treat ailments, right? Like we pay doctors when we're sick. We should be paying them when we're healthy.
Yeah, that's true.
2 more paragraphs because this is going to relate directly to everything else. Here's the next quote. Mr. Skallas is proponent for a lifestyle based on a relatively obscure theory called the Lindy Effect, from which he's derived his Twitter handle, Lindyman, his Substack, the Lindy newsletter, his podcast, Lindy Talk, which I don't think you're doing anymore, and his practical philosophy of health, exercise, diet, and consumer choice. The Lindy Effect can be traced to a 1964 article in the New Republic called Lindy's Law by historian Albert Goldman, who describes the bald-headed, cigar-chomping know-it-alls who foregather every night at Lindy's, the diner on Broadway known for its cheesecake. And they postulated that since comedians have an exhaustible supply of good material, since they don't have forever comedy, therefore the life expectancy of a television comedian is proportional to the total amount of their exposure on TV, on the medium. They've been on forever. They can keep being on forever. If they've only got 1 5-minute set in Carson, we don't know if they could do it again. That's the principle, right? So, Jerry Seinfeld, 70, he just played 2 sold out shows here in Toronto at Scotiabank. That's where like the Raptors play, and he's 70. So, and he's been doing this since Carson. So like this guy, he's, this is a long-term comedian. Whereas if you go on the Netflix comedy thing, like all these people are new.
His show is probably a better example, which is, his show's still being played while so many other shows have just gone away, and you still have these.
Nobody was watching Frasier.
And it crosses generations, which is another big thing with the Lindy Effect. There has to be churn, generational churn, and it has to cross into it, which is why somebody asked me, is Bitcoin Lindy? It's just hasn't really existed long enough for more generations to come after, which is how we get all of this, like these ancient literature, these old books. They were just handed over from person to person each generation. And, somebody said, okay, this is valuable. And then next generation said this is valuable. And so there's some quality there that makes it timeless. But that takes, a lot of time. And we're kind of being assaulted by tons of media and works now. So it's going to be, and not many things survive. So you can kind of trick yourself into thinking that there's a lot of kind of Lindy works happening right now. And, further future generations won't care about any of this, really. It's happening right now.
Well, I relate to this because my first book got popular in 2010. So I developed 100,000 person following on Facebook. Those people have grown up with me, but they're now, I can see from the messages and so on, they're in the older generation. Yeah. And then I have less followers on Instagram, where I have 35,000 followers because that generation doesn't cross with me as much. And then TikTok, I got like 3. I don't even have TikTok because I can see generationally that each of these social media medium has lasted precisely one generation,
right.
Whereas YouTube, maybe you could argue, is actually Lindy.
I think YouTube has replaced television and is actually the kind of homepage of the internet. And there's also a funny thing happening, which is a lot of old web pages are being deleted. So if you go to these old Wikipedia pages, there's a lot of dead links. If you go to these articles from blogs, like they don't exist anymore.
That's why they're all linking to the Wayback Machine.
Yeah. So like people think, okay, we have the Wayback Machine, that's going to preserve it. But that's not really how things work. How things work is one person, gives something to another person, and that person sees value, and then that person hands it over. And, it goes through people. It's just not really like frozen into like a website. The Library of Alexandria burned down, but the theory is we didn't really lose anything there because everything that was valuable was.
So what year? What can you give us some context for those of us who aren't as?
I think that was
this like is this the Roman Empire like 2,000 years ago?
Yeah, this is a little bit before.
That was to have contained at that time all known written works.
Right, but the thing is, it's not like everything was there. Things were scattered around the ancient world. There were copies everywhere. This was just one place that held a large number of those works. So, did we really lose anything? I don't know. Things were already being copied everywhere, and they went through the Byzantium, they went through the Arab conquests, and people sort of took Aristotle, they took Plato, they took all these classics that we have, these stories like the Odyssey, and kept copying them and transmitting them. So if they're truly valuable, people preserve them, people hand them over, they make multiple copies.
Yeah. Okay. Generational churn has been introduced as a concept of importance for the rest of our conversation, which means something must survive across generations, hence the definition of a book being a classic, for example, which is why that phrase modern classic should not really exist.
Right.
Because you can't just label Roald Dahl a modern classic until he's lasted, my parents and my kids kind of thing.
It's also I think I spoke to Nassim Taleb about this. There's an inverse relationship between popularity at first and length of time it lasts. So if something's very, very popular, like a lot of sports biographies are very popular, or your social science book of the year is very popular. It sells millions of copies. Those things don't actually tend to last. He told me that things that mostly last are kind of like a medium to low medium popularity, that just consistently books get bought at that sort of lower level, where it's just, you have to break through the first filter. It has to be somewhat popular, can't be completely obscure. And it just sort of has to kind of continue at this certain kind of lower level pace, rather than the whole, we sold 20 million copies because this was the topic of the day, and then nobody reads this anymore. So
that's interesting. Like the longest running show on Broadway right now is Wicked, which has been there 20 years. Well, I've been to New York five or 10 times in the 20 years. I don't remember hearing about it at first, but now, of course, it's everywhere, and likely will, I'm sure now with the movie, like be on Broadway kind of for another 20 years. Right. But when it started, it was probably like the U2 play Spider-Man was like the biggest thing in the headlines. You know what I mean? Okay. You have 3 quotes on reading. I normally would ask you for your comment on them, but I really want to get into your 3 most formative books. I'm just going to read them. From August 12, 2024, you wrote a famous newsletter on your Lindy newsletter called Don't Give Up on Reading Just Yet. But you said, up until recently, everyone read novels. Men, women, it didn't matter. You then quote a Nielsen statistic saying that now men only make up 20% of the audience for literary fiction. And you write, men have mostly left books behind and gravitated towards podcasts, YouTube channels, or Twitter. This is a common pattern occurring, not only the decline of literary fiction for men, but also activities getting more gendered, like poetry and horse riding.
Yeah. I mean, you can kind of see that when you walk into a bookstore, it's very female coded. Like the books are representative of the readers, which is mostly women. So there's lots of fiction geared toward women, a lot of certain books around spirituality. I don't know what you want to say, but it's very obvious when you walk into them that the readership of books, and it brings up really to digress here. A lot of women are actually doing things that men used to do, like write poetry. Like men used to write poetry. Women kind of do that. A lot of women love horse riding. Men used to love horse riding.
It's been taken over, actually. You argue that it was almost all men, and now it's almost all women.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a shift. I think women...
You show some graphs. You show some... You're always quoting something.
Yeah, so it's funny. A lot of women are taking over a lot of things that we considered maybe old aristocratic male culture, and a lot of men are kind of into... specialized YouTube videos for their interests, right? Like you just nerd out on some like really specific interest that you have, building a ship or house or whatever you want, whatever it is.
Oh my gosh.
And so things are a little bit more gendered now, which I think is Lindy. Like you always had like a different traditions between women and men. So I don't think that's a big issue, but I do think book reading, especially by men, is going to decline even more in the future. And I think, they're going online to find their get stimulated by ideas or their interests.
What's interesting with gender, because of course I've always thought, at least for the last 5+ years, that we live in like a post-gender society. Like that's been my view. That's how I've seen people in my extended family that identify as non-binary or identify as trans or kind of neither gender. And then yesterday in Trump's inauguration, he said again, in 2025, there were only 2 genders in America, men and women. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, didn't we already move past? So I do wonder about your thoughts on gender in particular as a thing, being Lindy or not, because I guess maybe I'm living in Toronto, Canada. Like our bathrooms don't say men and women on them, and they haven't in years,
Oh, really?
They say like
they don't
urinal,
say,
no urinal.
Oh, really? And I didn't know that.
Yeah, they say like what's inside, or they say like
okay.
all welcome, and like we don't have gendered. At least I don't, from my vantage point, I don't usually see gendered bathrooms anymore. You know,
I see them all the
Yeah.
time. Wow. Okay. I thought, although I do see a few unisex bathrooms, but I generally think,
or like a restaurant will have like all these sinks, and then they just have like a row of 8 bathrooms, but the bathrooms all have their own door.
Yeah.
You know, you go to Othership, which is like the sauna, really popular sauna cold plunge place. There's some in New York, there's some in Toronto. It's like a co-ed change room. Of course, there's little stalls where you go behind a curtain for your private parts, but everyone's taking off their clothes together, putting them on their clothes. It's just like, again, I don't mean to say this, but I've always thought like we're kind of moving past the gender binary. We had Alok Vaid-Menon on the show. You know, Alok wrote a really famous book called Beyond the Gender Binary. They were our guests in chapter 106. So I just feel like the gendering of everything is also kind of old, you know, like kind of, I guess it's Lindy, to your point.
Yeah.
But then if you read Beyond the Gender Binary by Alok Vaid-Menon, they argue that the gender splitting was actually kind of a colonial thing, that when they went and took over another country like India, you need to stamp people's ID cards. And so they kind of forced people into this male or female archetype. But before, you know, you had blue, long-haired, flute-playing gods that were not, you know, specifically a male or female. So they argue that the gender binary is actually new.
No, I don't think that. I mean, I think gender as sort of as a concept is pretty Lindy. It's been around a while. I think it's also harder. I think you're seeing a lot of resistance to that here because there's an attempt to flatten and make sort of take gender away. I don't know. I tend to see there's a lot of differences between men and women, and I think trying to shoehorn everybody into one thing is actually causing a lot of problems. For example, like mass employment in a way, I think is obviously it's actually probably a good thing for the most part. But I think putting men and women both in this sort of employment box where they're doing exactly the same thing may actually be the thing that's hurting, like people, you know, forming relationships, having children in the future. I think
what kind of jobs are you thinking about?
Anything involving, you know, what I call just regular, maybe white collar employment, which is, you know, you're putting people, they're trying to mix gender roles and work. No, I think it's actually making it harder to like raise a family, you know, spend time with your children, having, because I think when you look at the elite, what do the elite do? I think a lot of the elite actually have a stay at home partner, and then the one person goes to work, or, you know, that's considered kind of, a luxury right now. And I think that's for that reason. It's because it does kind of mess up with certain roles that, you know, kind of we've kind of evolved into. Not saying women have never worked, women have always worked, but in sort of more of like ad hoc ways. Whereas I think modern employment is a bit like a prison, or a school, that and you're competing with other people and you're trying to reach a certain level. And I think it takes a lot out of, you know, I think employment is one of like central concepts of our time that we don't discuss enough, because I think it takes a lot of energy to build a real career, and then to find a mate who also is at your level, and then who supposedly you're supposed to love, and then also raise a family. And I think it just takes a lot of energy and effort to do all those things. And I think it's kind of causing a little bit of problems, especially if the government isn't coming to help. I almost think that the government could somehow help by instituting some UBI, maybe just for women, knowing that they are, you know, also, you know, carrying a child and are, you know, historically, you know, being more involved in raising them. So I think there's some gender realities.
You're married, right?
Yes.
You're married and no kids, right?
Yes.
So if you were living in Canada, like I have a lot of friends in New York where you live, and I know you're from Chicago, and you have a kid. I don't know if it's 6 weeks or 12 weeks, but it's something like that where you get time off. Whereas Canada, it's 52 weeks paid. Right. And I'm not calling it UBI, but we have institutionalized in our government for a very long time that if you have a baby, you have 1 year paid time off with your job guaranteed at the end of that. seems like we're prioritized. It seems like
that's not
more
enough.
of a priority.
That's not enough. Like,
no, I agree. I agree completely with that.
I generally think you need to restructure society to make it easier to sort of raise a family financially and time. I think modern parenting in a way doesn't resemble classical parenting.
Oh, interesting. So
this is what
you're getting at.
Modern parenting resembles or something completely different. And like classical parenting may resemble modern pet ownership. So I think people like pets because you can still go on vacation and have a pet. You can still live your life and have a pet. It's a very casual thing to have a pet. Obviously, you take care of it and people enjoy having it. And I've noticed people now have not just one dog, they have two dogs. We're entering like a 2-dog society.
You say modern parenting resembles pet ownership?
Classical parenting resembles.
Classical.
Right. And I think classical parenting is a little bit more laid back, a little bit more, kids playing on the streets, coming in at night, a lot of hands off kind of. Whereas modern parenting is very, hands-on, driving your kids everywhere. You're essentially a chauffeur. You have to be with them all the time. And there's a lot of, there's stress and competition, a lot of peer pressure with also making sure
everyone's in 12 activities.
Yeah, they don't fall off the conveyor belt. Like you don't want to fall off the race, especially in America where there's both a carrot and stick. Right. The carrot is very successful. You can become a millionaire. You can be rich. But the carrot is if you fall social classes, like you enter a really bad place. You don't want to be kind of poor in America. Like it becomes a very first world to very third world very fast. So I just think there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of new kind of ways we think about parenting. Because if you think about like 100 years ago where kids were walking around, even 50 years ago, even like in my childhood, I remember just kind of going out and not coming in till later in the day and without supervision. So I think a lot's changed. There's a lot of non-Lindy things around raising children, and that makes it a decision that's it's a lot more serious than it used to be. It just used to be a pattern that people would do, and now it's not.
So our guest in chapter 127 was Lenore Skenazy, also dubbed America's Worst Mom by the Today Show for letting her 9-year-old son ride the subway by himself in New York City. Author of Free Range Parenting, that book, The Movement, which is one of the 4 core tenets proposed by Jonathan Haidt in his #1 nonfiction book of the year. He was our guest in chapter 103 called The Anxious Generation. So there's some movement back towards this kind of Lindy concept, but you said structural changes. Is that what you're talking about? Like more free range and less? Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd insert into that? Like I came out with the mat leave comment. So is there anything else structurally that you see that society could benefit from the parenting perspective by making more Lindy?
Probably a safer society. Probably like allowing more free range, but I think it's so. We're so in this world. I think we're really in a new world where I think parenting is like a race. There's a lot of peer pressure, and you're seeing it with less people going that route. So if we just enter like historically where we would be, where it was just this a regular pattern of life, that'd be easier. But it's hard to do when the environment has changed.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting, too, because my family just came back from a beach vacation. I'm very privileged to be able to say. And on the beach, there's like, an annual beach soccer game just happening in the like little resort. And one of the guys is way better than everybody else, like by a mile. Like I couldn't get the ball. Yeah. I couldn't even get close to getting the ball off him anytime. And I was like, what do you do? He's like, I play in the Premier League. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm in Chelsea. So what team? He said, well, I'm the under whatever 17s. Yeah. I said, well, how many is there? He said, oh, there's 7 levels of league below the top league, starting from under, I want to say like 6 or 8 or something, like super young. And I said, what's the % chance you make it? And he said, because he's 4 levels back, he said, like less than 5%. And this special, like I said, there's 7 levels. Well, we have the same thing in Canada with hockey,
right?
Like there's a forced pressurization to these, and Nassim Taleb has talked about it a lot, these very finite spots at these prestigious schools where if you don't get a ticket to the right private school or the right high school or the right college, then you're not going up into the right channel. So it's forcing a lot of specialization. A lot of kids are in a lot of programs from a very young age.
Yeah, I think this is historically unprecedented at this level of competition and structure and organization. But
yeah. Okay, cool. Well, listen, listeners now, this deep into the conversation, we haven't even got to your books yet. Listeners now can see why I consider you to be one of the most original thinkers of our time. I don't agree with everything you say, nor should I, nor will I, and nor do I think everybody listening will. And this is why it's fun to talk to you, because original thinking in this 3 billion people logging into meta everyday society is the hardest thing to come by. Is there an order that you can point at these three that I can introduce them? Which would you like to talk about first, either in your life or in the chronology of the show?
We can talk about Publius Syrus first, his little aphorisms.
Yeah, great. Oh, thanks for saying aphorisms, because I've been saying aphorisms in my head.
It's
Okay. So let's get into your three most formative books with Lindyman. I'm very excited. I read these books. I actually really like all of them. The very first one, and I'll take a minute to introduce it to our guests, those listening. I want you to picture like you're holding it in a bookstore. So I'm holding up a very thin, like 44-page book called The Moral Sayings of Publius Syrus, Syrus, translated by Darius Lyman. So Syrus, also known as Publius Syrus, lived from 85 BCE to 43 BC in Antioch, which is present-day Turkey. He was a slave turned into a playwright. His plays are apparently lost to history, maybe in the library, I don't know. But what remains are these crystallized distillations, the aphorisms of 1,087 pithy one-liners, starting from number 1, as men, we are all equal in the presence of death, all the way up to number 1,087, man's life is short, therefore an honorable death is his immortality. And again, it's like a 44-page book. It looks like a pamphlet, but the vastness in here is like, you can't read not even a full page before stopping. Like it's a vastness deep as an ocean. The cover is a thick purple ribbon across the bottom that says his name, Publius Syrus, and a white ribbon on top that says a Roman slave. There's a painting of a man in a gold robe with a long beard beside a man with a white turban and a red and gray tunic, both standing while a third man sits on a stone behind them. There's a small town visible in the woods in the distance. Publius' moral sayings defy categorization. Are they Stoic? Are they Epicurean? Are they skeptic? Are they cynic? All we know is that they are witty and wise, and the former slave turned playwright, he transcends doctrine and eventually ultimately embraces humanism. File this one under 430.042 for languages/Germanic languages. Probably not a good Dewey Decimal. Lindyman, please tell us about your relationship with the moral sayings of Publius Syrus, translated by Darius Lyman.
Yeah, it's wisdom distilled. One sentence, a few sentences maybe per line. And it's actually, it takes a while to read because you stop and you think about it. And if you lived a long enough life, you can recognize how right he is on many of them, right? You've seen it yourself, right? And he's articulating something maybe but you've never really seen written out. And I love this format. It's thousands of years old. You see it pop up in ancient literature all the time, which is here's one or two sentences of life. It's real. And we're moving on to the next one. And it's a joy. And I think it really, for me, especially in a land, in a world of like really lower attention span, and surrounded by lots of media, lots of video, it makes reading fun again because you're really getting.
It's like Twitter.
Yeah, and in a way, that's why I think a lot of Twitter is so addicting, because it is this. It's just maxims, and there's this long literature of these.
The 10 Commandments is the first listicle.
Right. And but there's way more than that. People just focus on the 10. There's like a whole body of literature. There's like the French moralists.
Yeah. This is why I was going to say orient us, because I've heard you talk about aphorisms often. I don't know how you came across Publius Syrus. Like, I mean, this guy's stuff is still getting printed 2,000 years later. I'm ashamed to say I never heard of the guy. I never heard of the guy. So was it Nassim Taleb's writing? Was it like Ryan Holiday?
It was Nassim Taleb mentioned it, I think a long time ago, that he was reading it. And then, but he actually published his own aphorisms, his own book.
Bed of Procrustes?
Yeah, which is just as, which is really good. I liked it too. But there's this long literature of a lot of, like Nietzsche did it, a lot of like Oscar Wilde, a lot of authors write a lot of treatises, and then they enter the world of aphorisms and maxims, and it's really a pleasure to read because it's such distilled wisdom, and it hits hard, and you can tell it's lasted. It's so simple, right? These like just a few sentences, and that have been filtered throughout time. So I kind of recommend.
Can I read a few?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just let me give people a taste of this, and you can comment on these. Number 2, I already mentioned number 1. As men, we are all equal in the presence of death. Number 2, the evil you do unto others, you may expect in return.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Number 4, to dispute a drunkard is to debate an empty house. Number 18, do not find your happiness in another's sorrow. Number 19, an angry lover tells himself many lies.
Love it. All true.
He has a lot of confusing ones, too. I mean, number 144, society in shipwreck is comfort to all.
I get people have like a lot of comfort in complaining, right? About how bad things are.
Oh, that's what he's saying. Number 155, a god can hardly disturb a man truly happy.
Yeah, I've seen it. I don't think I'm one of those, but I've seen other people.
I get pulled by the vicissitudes, by the news, by the, I get angry about this. I get up and down by that. But truly, it kind of sort of slaps you into like clear thinking. You're like, a god can hardly disturb. Well, if I was really happy, I wouldn't be bothered by all anything, There is no need, 216, there is no need of spurs when the horse is running away.
That's a one that's a good one. I can't decide what he's saying with that one.
Well, I think he's saying, it's kind of Tim Ferriss's adage that like he who speaks less at the end of the negotiation wins. Like, if you're trying to negotiate for a mattress and it's $1,000 and you're like 900 and the guy's like, yeah, I don't know, I'll see what I can do. Yeah, okay. And then you're like asking for more. Like, I think that's what I got from it. It's like, you already won. Like, you don't need to spur the horse. It's already leaving. It's already running away.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I misread that. I guess that's part of the problem with these things / good thing is that they take your mind down whichever path your mind wants to go, How about this one? 218. Give me your thoughts. Speed itself is slow when cupidity awaits. Cupidity, like Cupid arrow. I'm assuming. Speed itself is slow when cupidity awaits. Like falling in love makes time stop.
Yeah, that could be it. I'd have to sit back and think about that one. That's an interesting one.
So it goes on and on. Number 368. It is a weak mind that cannot bear the possession of riches.
Yeah, that's that famous. Some of these sayings actually pop up in multiple other places. Like, it takes a better man to handle wealth than to handle poverty. Right. So that's like the one that pops up all the time. And then once you start getting some success, you realize how true it is. You're like, oh, I can batten down the hatches. I can, like, we humans are almost like pretty good with scarcity, but like all of a sudden I have options. Ooh, I have temptation. That actually is kind of difficult to handle a little bit.
Yeah. Listen to this one, 385. And then it's kind of converse of that one, I think, but maybe not. Poverty needs little, semicolon. Avarice, everything.
Yeah, I think we don't really have like a way to satiate like our greed, right? There's no ceiling for greed. There's no ceiling for more. Like as a human, you just keep going if you want. There's no satisfaction, right? So
yeah, that's kind of like the Joseph Heller, Kurt Vonnegut adage that they were at a party for a billionaire on Shelter Island. Kurt Vonnegut said to Joseph Heller, "You've written the greatest work of literature of the 20th century. This guy is a hedge fund manager who made more money than you have your whole life last year. How do you feel about that?" And Joseph Heller said, "Well, I have something he'll never have. Enough."
Right. There you
go. So you mentioned there's a lot of people like, through the work of like Tim Ferriss, really his podcast that came out in 2014. He's the first person that brought onto my radar this sort of big three Stoic philosophers: Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. And then I kind of bought and read through, Meditations, Letters from a Stoic, The Art of Living. But you and others like NNT, Nassim Taleb, Brian Holiday, who was our guest in chapter 30, others have really gone down this pathway. I wondered if you might give us a little bit of a starter, either reading list or people we should check out. Like, what's your mental map of the greatest thinkers throughout history? Because you seem to be coming at it from an interesting perspective and one that is not affiliated with a particular religion. So I'm curious how you think about who you read from the past, how you filter that, and if you can kind of orient us to your thinking.
Yeah, there's a lot, especially if you could sign up for the Loeb Classical Library, I think, and you'll
LOBE.
Yeah, LOEB, and you'll just get access to thousands of works of classical antiquity, and there's all these kind of some obscure authors, and then there's well-known ones, like the Stoics, very popular, very good. A lot of great lessons about how to handle fortune, how to handle luck going against you and going with you, how to not having it affect you. I mean, that's a great foundation.
Marcus Aurelius, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus. Any others?
There's others like there's a guy named Theophrastus, Theophrastus, and he was a student of Aristotle, and he wrote a great book called Characters, about all these types of people you meet in day-to-day life, like a liar, somebody who tries to, a flatterer, all these descriptions of these like maybe 30 or 40 archetypes that are still used today. So that's also a great way of.
This guy's like 2,000 years old as well.
Yeah, he's 2,000 years old, but these characters are all modern. That he's portraying. So there's people like that. There's people like Plutarch who write history, and he's sort of he takes these historical figures and then he compares them. So there's a lot of material out there, and you can kind of go into it as much as you want. Then you can go farther into history, and you go into like the French. There's like these French from the 17th and 16th century, also aphorists like La Bruyère, La Rochefoucauld.
Did you say aphorers? Aphorers, the people that are making their writing into aphorisms?
Yeah, and they're excellent as well. Then you have the Germans, like 100 years later with
Sorry, 1 second. Before we get to the Germans, what was going on in France, 16th, 17th century? Is this
just the richest country in the world, had the most talent?
This is the beginning of the Enlightenment and the.
You see that a lot, which is we have the works from the Greeks when Greece was, really successful, advanced country in the world, right? And then it went to Rome, and then we have all these like great literature from Rome. And then we go to France, and because France was the richest country in the world at that time when they were writing, and then Germany, which was also became rich. So in a way, like
England probably, Shakespeare,
like Shakespeare. Yeah. That's when England was kind of becoming
Chaucer.
Yeah. So in a way,
to follow the richest country to find the. So you're saying Elon Musk, from the vantage point of 200 to 500 years, as the richest human in the richest country, his tweets will one day be crystallized and distilled down to like 100 pithy phrases.
I don't know if he will, but I think there's something to be said about talent goes to where the money is, the opportunity is, where the action is. And I use the example of priests. Like throughout the last 500,000 years, Catholic priests were scientists of the day. And like if you Google Catholic priest scientists, you'll come up with your Wikipedia page of all these inventions they came up right with, because that was a very prestigious job, and people sent their firstborn sons to become priests. It was like a very high status position. You had a lot of power and a lot of time to also study on your own. And today, though, in a post-religious age,
often they were the only people that read.
Right, that too.
In a society.
And now we're living in a post-religious age, so the amount of talent going into the priesthood, probably of all religions too. It's not just about Catholic priests, but Islam and Hinduism. Because religion is relatively low status now, you have that talent going into business, law, wherever, right? Academia. So that's where you're getting a lot more influencers, right? Yeah.
YouTubers. I mean, wherever a friend just told me my son doesn't want to be a doctor. It doesn't make enough money. Like I literally heard that phrase the other day. Doesn't make enough money. I said, what are you talking about? Doctors are the most paid job in society. Like I'm Indian. Like, are you kidding me? Like doctors number one, and he's like, no. He just asked me how much, just like a 16-year-old kid. He asked me how much all these jobs paid. And it turns out all the business people were way higher. So he wants to be a business
person. Doctors have a really good high status. That's a good Lindy profession that I think actually hasn't been, like, we all kind of respect doctors, right? Still, like it's kind of stayed steady. It'll probably stay steady for a while. People talk about what positions will AI replace, but I think doctors are always going to be here, so.
Well, my dad was born in Taran, which is a village outside of Amritsar in India, in a poor family in 1944. And I asked him, Dad, I was born in Oshawa, Ontario in 1979 here. I said, why did you become a teacher? Because all our Indian friends are the dad's a doctor in every single family, except you. And you know what he told me? When I grew up, where I grew up, doctors and teachers got paid the same.
No, interesting.
Education was on par with health as a
like a professor, right?
Yeah. Well, no, just education. Like, when you see the starting salary for teachers in Arkansas is $28,000, and you kind of wonder what's going on with the education system.
Right.
You can sort of see we've devalued it over the long term as
teachers.
An important, teachers.
Yeah. Interesting question. I wonder if teachers. That's interesting. I always consider teachers to be middle status throughout, like not necessarily the highest.
Well, they are in terms of they all have, 2 degrees,
right?
From colleges, and they are teaching our kids, and they're loved by their communities, but they're not paid anywhere commensurate to the value in society that they provide, which is, Warren Buffett has famously said, I could have become a kindergarten teacher, but I was just a guy that looked at books and said, this company's not worth as much as people think. That was worth more in society, but being a kindergarten teacher could arguably be just as important, So Aristotle was a teacher, Plato was a teacher.
I think he started in an academy, right? They were like alternative teachers, right? They were kind of, we're starting our own school here,
kind of like the Singularity University vibe, a
little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got your thought on some of the moral sayings. I wanted to get your, some of the thoughts in this book around death and dying. It's literally the first aphorism. You wrote an article November 6, 2023 for your popular newsletter, which I've now recommended a few times. And the title is Soon You Will Legally Choose When You Pass Away. You show, and I was shocked to read this. That's partly why I like your work so much. I'm like, what? Canada had over 10,000 people who died by euthanasia in 2021. 10 times higher than the US and far higher than any country in the world. And I know as a Canadian, I do hear old people in my family and my friends in their 80s and 90s openly. I've had conversations about assisted dying and them talking about it openly. And we've had conversations. I just didn't realize we were the world leader in this area. And you're now saying, not only are you the world leader, Canada, but you think everyone's going to choose when they die in the next couple of generations.
Yeah, I don't think it's unprecedented. I think it's assisted dying's always been around as a kind of a gray area that people, the doctor would kind of tell the family, and then, a decision would be made that, life isn't worth living, there'd be and then they would kind of end it in some humane way, with painkillers. But now it's actually an explicit, it's taking it's funny. It's like, it's a transformation of kind of a gray area norm into an explicit right. And a lot of times society doesn't know what to do when you turn something into an explicit kind of right. And it sort of takes us into another society where we're like, you want to choose to die? I mean, you can. And there's like a host, you have to go through a panel. You can say you're depressed. So it is really like kind of like a newer thing.
Sorry to throw this in there in a slightly dark way, but we also have higher than ever suicide rates than we've had in over 70 years since kind of around the war. So there's assisted, and then there's also like you're doing it yourself, that are both higher than ever.
Right.
And conversely, we have the longevity movement. We have the longevity movement with literally selling T-shirts saying #don't die.
Right.
So there's this new bifurcation coming, it seems, between choice of death and never dying, both in opposition to what I grew up with, which was you just naturally die eventually.
Right. And I also think it's a health of society that it's a good barometer. Like, how would you tell if a society is like healthy or not? Well, check the suicide rates, because in my opinion, it's maybe not a wealth thing. You can kind of live well and happy without much wealth. But if people are, killing themselves or going to assisted suicide places, it could be a symptom for a society that's a little sick. I don't know. But
Dr. Gabor Mate called, and he was our guest in chapter 115. He calls our current society a toxic culture, and he uses suicide rates as one example. He also uses addiction rates as another example.
I definitely think it's a place you don't want to go down the ladder, and I think it's not a nice world if you are not. And I think that's why there's this really work stress in the air. There's this hustle culture in the air, especially in places in North America where. There's a tension because you don't want to slide down the ladder, because if you slide down the ladder, bad things are happen, and it's hard to kind of come back up again. So I think there's a lot going on. While we celebrate winners, I also, I travel a lot, and I notice what's the biggest insult you can call someone in your country. In America, it's you're a loser, but that's not the biggest insult in like the United Kingdom. It's something along the lines of like, you're not funny, or you're not like, you can't get along. Or in France, it's something like you're not civilized. But like in America, it's like you're a loser, right? You lost. What did I lose? This game we're all playing, and so we have winners. So what happens to the losers, right? I mean, they're in a bad psychological state. So I think there's a lot.
Even the Trump inauguration and the Jimmy Carter funeral, the article said, Trump only sits beside Obama because he thinks Obama was a winner, and all the other past presidents, no one else won 2 terms. He only sits beside Obama. I was like, what? Like, but to your point, this is like the loser winner economy.
Yeah, I think he generally,
and I think you're making a broader point about what's considered negative in society gives you a glimpse into what's valued.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think Trump is a great example of someone who considers himself a winner, and that there's losers, and he's not one of them, and he wants to be around other winners. And that's why he's almost like this grandfather figure in America at this point, almost like the ethos of the nation, whether you like it or not.
Expansionism is Lindy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're seeing that now. I mean, we're back to borders changing with Ukraine and Russia. I think you're seeing movements
to
happening.
Some extent, Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, and I think Syria had a regime change, and
even China with
Taiwan.
The Uyghur Muslim population. Like, I mean, just when you see it, there's societies or Taiwan or Hong Kong. Like, there's. And I'm not a geopolitical guy. I'm just saying from a distance. Trump saying, I want Greenland, Panama, and Canada does not seem out of context from a Lindy perspective.
No, it's actually a very normal early 20th century, 19th century American view of, we're expanding territory. It's just, we've decided to freeze borders after 1945, but, you can't, I don't know if you can really do that to a natural system that changes and things change. And I think we're in a, moment of change again. So
how do you decide where to go? Because you're living in France right now. The article in 2021 also quotes you living in a part of France. You write confidently and with detail about a lot of countries that you presumably have lived in. Like I've seen you writing about Istanbul. I've seen you writing about. So what's a healthy city to you?
I have a lot of followers. So when I go to a city, I hang out with. I have a meetup, so we talk. And so that helps with knowing just the city that I'm in and what's going on with the day-to-day people and not just sort of the tourist sites. So that always helps.
And your wife is just cool with being like, let's just live wherever?
Well, no, we live in New York, but we're on.
Okay.
We travel. Sometimes I just travel just because I have to write an article, right? Or about a place or, see a place. So it's not, if you're making money from it, you get a lot more respect, right? If you're just sort of traveling, there's no, I don't know. I think women kind of, she's like, are we, is this a business or are you just doing this for pleasure? No, it's just, you get more respect once you turn things into
one of
business.
My favorite online writers right now is Thomas Peo. He's actually a dream guest for the show. He writes the Substack or newsletter called Uncharted Territories. And he first gained popularity at the beginning of the pandemic when he wrote the first ever long form, graph-filled, research-based article on medium.com about why this thing is going to go big. And he was right about everything. But he also travels all around the world writing from the perspective of different cultures. It's almost like a bit of a parlor trick to actually see what's happening anywhere. You almost have to be outside of it. Yeah,
I mean, it's very tempting to just mediate reality through a computer screen. And I think generally that's what a lot of what we're seeing is, but it creates like a weird feedback loop, which is, because the online world isn't necessarily reality. It's like a version of it, especially with like Twitter and X. You're getting like some exaggerated view of things. So you kind of do have to go to places and at least like walk around and talk to people a little bit. Ideally you'd live there, but you only have one life and you can't really do everything you want to do, but you definitely don't want to mediate reality through a computer screen. I think that's
a really interesting point. Yeah. Because you're huge on X, but you don't really have like a Instagram, TikTok following. Some people are, Dr. Becky is all on Instagram, but not other things. Some people are just big on YouTube. Some people are Nassim Taleb, arguably. I know he's got probably 800,000 or something followers, but originally it was through his books.
Right.
So you see people kind of confirming the medium is the message as well. Like it's nice for you to say that because you have a vantage point through Twitter, but of course Twitter is.
Well, that's
Twitter itself has become itself a bit of a black mirror,
Oh yeah, I mean, but it's a way to communicate with people. I'm just not very good at video, or I tried podcasts for a while, but it's actually hard to like email people you like and then you get rejected. You're like, oh, I'd really like to talk to you. It's actually takes a lot of work.
That's why you stopped the podcast, the pitching part.
Yeah, I think you have these lists of guests and you can get some of them and then other ones you can't. So you have to go to others. Yeah. It's, I don't know. I just rather just write and it's like, it's enjoyable. And, I feel it gets the good stuff out, but podcasting is great if you can get like what you have, your situation, you have good guests on. It's so ideal.
Well, one of our dream guests is the author of your second most formative book. And that, of course, is the one and only, heretofore, multiple time mentioned already, author of one of my formative books, which is The Black Swan. He wrote your formative book, Antifragile, Things That Gain from Disorder. I am holding a thick, beat up, well-read, well-loved, but never in big doses because it's so dense. I read like 3 pages and like I put it down. This is the one and only Antifragile. It's got a giant ripped piece of paper separating the left and the right sides of the book. On the left, it's white with anti-fra written in like a 96-point black caps Arial narrow. On the right, it's orange with agile, written in a 96-point white caps Arial narrow. Subtitle underneath, things that gain from disorder. And also on the cover, it says New York Times bestseller, author of The Black Swan, and an incredible Wall Street Journal blurb that says startling, richly crammed with insights, stories, fine phrases, and intriguing asides. I will have to read it again and again, which isn't even as glowing as the HBR blurb, Harvard Business Review, from the inside cover, which says, you will learn more about more things from this book and be challenged in more ways than by any other book you have read this year. Trust me on this. Like, this is massive in terms of its scope and its scale and its intellectual ferocity. Published in November 27th, 2012 by the actual Random House, by the way, imprint of Random House Publishing, a division of, at the time, Random House LLC, before they bought Penguin. NNT, as he's called, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, was born in Lebanon in 1960 and is a mathematical statistician who got an MBA from Wharton in 1983 before working as a hedge fund manager and derivatives trader before getting his PhD 15 years later at the University of one of your favorite cities in the world, Paris. He also wrote Fooled by Randomness in 2001, The Black Swan 2007, one of my own formative books, as I mentioned, and The Bed of Procrustes, which I have not read, in 2010. Today, I think he lives in New York. You would know. As a professor at NYU. He's listed as a professor at NYU. And he basically stands uncertainty on its head, making it a desirable, even necessary. Just as human bones get stronger when subjected to stress and tension, many things in life benefit from disorder, volatility, and turmoil. Those things are, of course, anti-fragile. File this one under 155.2 philosophy and psychology / differential and development psychology. Lindy, man, please tell us about your relationship with the one and only Antifragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Yeah, formative book that I read years and years ago. That it's when I first encountered the concept of Lindy, which is related to Antifragile, which is the more disorder, certain things get stronger. There's a level above resilience, and we should be.
Resilience survives disorder. Antifragile gets stronger
and gets more powerful over time, which kind of is an interesting topic because you don't really think of things that get stronger when they encounter a lot of chaos. You think of things in my head, it's just resilience, but actually things that grow. Is a fascinating kind of idea. And like in any complex system, I think like you mentioned bones or stressing your heart, things can actually get stronger and better. And then there's the realm of the non-biological, which is ideas, traditions, works of art, actually gain more prominence over time. The more that they're sort of attacked, the more they're filtered. And so there must be something fundamental in these things that have survived, because not everything, there's a reason why certain things kind of survive, and the longer they survive, there's less survivorship bias too. So like you should really appreciate things that have been around for a long time. There's some locked in adaptive value there that happens. So it gets you out of neomania, it's easy, especially in America, to think every new technology is going to change the way we live, or if it does change the way we live, that's a good thing. Again, and there's a trade-off. It got me thinking to trade-offs too, which is, the car is great for going long distances, but if you build your society around the car, then you're going to be sedentary, which leads to all these health issues. So there's a lot of trade-offs that happen with, new technology. Some of them are good, like Windows on houses, allow us to see, beautiful trees, beautiful nature. So in a way, not all technology is bad.
They do also kill nature quite a bit.
That's true. They could do that as well.
I mean, the glass condos they're putting up in Toronto are surrounded by birds.
The problem with those are you're only looking at other condos, which is not like you're not looking at these like fractal natural shapes. Definitely, that's why a lot of modern places kind of look depressing. Is if they're surrounded by other modern places, but if they're actually, if you read like Dwell magazine, they always have like a picture of this like really ultra modern house in like a forest or like woodland surrounded by trees, all these nice soothing shapes, right? But then
it's only good if others don't join you,
right? But then you see them all bunched up together. And it's just like, oh, no, nothing here has a shape, right? And, we got rid of our ornate architecture in the past, which made these buildings look beautiful. You can only replace that with kind of nature. That's what windows do. But if you surround yourselves with other windows, that doesn't work. So,
the other argument I've heard thrown into this is like, Nassim Taleb writes about the pyramids being anti-fragile versus. I don't mean to use it, but like the Twin Towers or the CN Tower or, the Empire State Building, because it's lasted 2,500 years, it's more likely to last the next 2,500 if there's a big natural disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of these pyramids are the ancient people talked about how old the pyramids were, and they'll probably survive all of us, right? I mean, so that's true as well. Certain traditions last for a reason. Getting rid of them, you don't know what's going to happen if you get rid of them. I think we're seeing some of that a little bit.
Like what? Like which ones?
I think generally, like getting rid of all religion, even kind of leads a void where people try to find religion in other things, and you're kind of coming up with like these little deities, and which can cause disorder and sort of. I think they call it Chesterton's fence, which is if there's a fence there for a reason, taking it down, we don't really know why. What would happen if we take it down? So yeah, we got to be careful with some kind of destruction of tradition. The other thing he talks about is scale, which is great. Like things don't just scale, they transform. So I'll use the example of books. Books used to be these manuscripts with these beautiful pictures and this interesting type of, these pictures on it, and the handwriting was kind of interesting. And then the printing press came in, and the printing press can, copy text, copy words, letters, but it can't copy the actual pictures or the artisanal kind of type of handwriting. So we kind of read books that are all text now without a lot of pictures. That's normal. Whereas perhaps books should be a little bit more ornamental. They should have a little bit more pictures, be a little bit more fun to read. Maybe not as much as like a comic book, but so we kind of just lose in that scale a little art, like we see with like houses too. Houses kind of look the same. Architecture looks the same because they're built kind of to be made to look like each other. So getting away from kind of local, getting away from kind of artisanal type of living gets us to, everybody's having the same fast food, everybody's dressing the same. So there's a little worrisome about all of us being connected, because that's where diversity kind of dies. Like if you travel around the world, everybody kind of looks the same, is dressed the same. Like the baseball hat you can see from America to China. And, the world 100, 200 years ago had all these different types of hats, and they're all gone. And just the baseball hat's one of the last ones left. So it's all these like interesting concepts of like connectivity and scale that he talks about.
It's a big book. It's a dense book. It's kind of a book I've had on my bedside table for like 5 years. And like I read like 10 pages of it, and then I'm like, I feel like I've eaten like the richest slice of pie for dessert. It's like there's so many ideas in this book that it's so dense, but he writes in such an accessible tone. I mean, like the very first, once you get through the first 30 pages of intro notes, the very first paragraph in the entire book is, "You are in the post office about to send a gift. A package full of champagne glasses to a cousin in central Siberia." Look, that's the opening sentence. Like he gets you like hook, line, and sinker, right? "As the package can be damaged during transportation, you would stamp fragile, breakable, or handle with care on it in red. Now, what is the exact opposite of such a situation? The exact opposite of fragile." Like he's like, it's accessible, but then he gets into big ideas. So the very last paragraph of this book, which comes on page 423, there's about 100 pages of notes after this. So if you're looking at the book, the last paragraph is like not near the end of the pages. It's like, there's a lot left after that. But the very last paragraph, he writes, and I'd like to get your comment on this. The best way to verify that you are alive is by checking if you like variations. Remember that food would not have a taste if it weren't for hunger. Results are meaningless without effort, joy without sadness, convictions without uncertainty, and an ethical life isn't so when stripped of personal risks.
Yeah, I mean, I call that kind of the payoff space, which is, I think we're kind of, if you're in employment, most people, majority, just want a very stable life, and but I think in general, there's a lot more depth to life once you enter like the world of like taking risks, starting a business, or even like approaching a girl that you like, or fasting and then eating, or putting your body at risk.
That's another thing he talks about. He talks about that a lot. Page 243, the subject line is, and 243, if it's Wednesday, I must be vegan.
Yeah, that's the
point.
Greek.
Well, the point in there is deprivation is a stressor.
Yeah, that's based on the Greek Orthodox diet, which is like, I don't know, a few thousand years old, of Wednesday and Friday, you're vegan. And then 30 days before Christmas and 30 days before Easter, you're vegan. And then throughout the year, the rest of the year, there's some days, which is, it's cyclical, like dieting. Instead of eating the same thing every day, you're doing variation, and your body's adapting to it, and it's adapting to the stressors, or to the, it's getting stronger, getting weaker, and then getting stronger. So that's built into a lot of ancestral diets as well.
Do you do this?
Yeah, I do it too. Mm-hmm.
So you're vegan 2 days a week?
Yep. And
everything else is normal. You just are vegan. No meat products or byproducts, as he puts it, even butter. He says that in the book, even butter.
I might have some butter, but yeah, but
no, I'm not pegging you down on it. I'm just curious about this, because that means, to me, in my head, I think, okay, that means eat local as Lindy, eat organic as Lindy, eat the foods that were ripening around the time of the year that made sense for them to ripen. And in the winter, you are a little bit skinnier and you eat a little bit less, and maybe you have less kills or less meat. I'm detecting some long-term bias towards, as he says, deprivation is a stressor, and you want to stress your body a bit because then it gets stronger. So, you're going on the record as saying this. He's writing about it. Brian Johnson's doing this. I'm looking at myself. I eat from morning till night. I don't do this at all. But you're making me think about it.
Yeah, it's also what we eat too. Sometimes, like with meat, we're eating a lot of muscle, and we're not eating the loins, the offal, the intestines. We're not eating the bone marrow. There's a lot of stuff we don't actually eat anymore that we ate a lot more of in the past, because meat is so the actual muscle is so delicious and readily available. There's also a lot going on with diet.
So you recommend things like bone marrow and things like
offal,
I think
intestines.
Offal, is that like
intestines? Yeah. Even like
so
the head.
What's that? Haggis.
Yeah.
You eat haggis.
Brains. Sometimes you could eat a little. There's a whole. It just goes out of fashion.
Or it's called. I was at a Spanish bar in Toronto called Bar Val, and I ordered something without realizing it was.
Yeah.
I think it's not called head cheese, is it? Or
head cheese. Called, that's it. That's it. You got it.
It's brains, right? Yeah, I thought it was cheese. It has the word cheese in it. Yeah. You know what I mean? But of course.
So there's also what we're eating now is also, it goes through like fads too. And
so give us some Lindy diet tips.
I mean, that's really what those are it. I follow variation. I tried to not eat meat all the time. I'm
assuming processed stuff is gone.
I try to avoid seed oils. Seed oils. That's relatively new. Again, that hasn't been tested much. With food and liquids, it's probably the easiest Lindy thing to do. It's just if it's this really new thing full of artificial preservatives, don't eat it.
What's the problem with seed oils?
Increases inflammation. It's sort of industrial engineered. Where they take these seeds.
Grapeseed oil is out.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like a newer process. Canola is actually the biggest product from Canada. It just became.
That's why it's called canola.
That's right,
Canadian,
and it's very cheap. So restaurants and companies kind of just put it into all their products and cook with it instead of olive oil or or with beef. Or butter or ghee. So yeah, it's just it became popular in the 70s for most people, and now it's in everything. And there's some theories that it's related to heart attacks, cardiovascular issues. Whether it is or isn't, you can just avoid it and not take the risk.
But then you can't eat at restaurants anymore.
Yeah, you'd have to ask the waiter. Although,
excuse me, are you frying these French fries in avocado oil?
Although some places are now sweet green, and I think there's another popular fast food place that is going to start offering seed oil free meals. So
you're in favor of this because it's more Lindy, because of course the seed oils are new.
Yeah,
you're in favor of the guy saying get rid of high fructose corn syrup from the Coca-Cola.
Yeah,
I mean. Hard to do this in practice, especially with cost. I mean, I was at the store the other day. Blue raspberries are $4.99. The organic ones are $12.99. It's like, what the hell? Like,
yeah,
it's 3 times the price.
I mean, we sort of
get no sprays that are new and bad for you.
It's easier to eat, non-Lindy, cheaper. It's actually a real effort to live your life, and but the richest people I feel like are doing that, and like there's like a big health movement at the top. They can access it, but a lot of people probably can't, or they don't have the willpower, especially if you're working some job you don't want to do, or your family.
Chef.
And it takes a lot of effort. But if you have that mindset, that kind of Lindy mindset of like, well, I'm just not going to engage with this if it's not 500 years old. Then
I do notice that they show all these health execs at the Trump inauguration yesterday. Jeff Bezos is
61.
Like, he's 61. Mark Zuckerberg is 40. These guys both look 20 years younger than their age. Like, Zuckerberg looks like he's 20. Brian Johnson has like the strength of an 18-year-old. Like, there's this. You've pointed out that idolizing youthfulness is very Lindy.
No, I think idolizing youthfulness is actually a kind of a newer thing, especially in America.
Oh, okay. I thought you said that that's like a historical thing. People have always wanted to be younger.
I think
maybe it's longevity being the obsession.
I think in America people don't want to get old. I think it's like a real youthful kind of. It's actually not. There's no respect that comes with being older. You don't have this. It's not a really traditional society. And I think you're just seen as like unattractive and old, and that's why you've all these celebrities and all these, not even just celebrities, just regular kind of people, kind of getting Botox, getting on testosterone, taking whatever it takes to sort of look youthful and dressing youthful. So.
That reminds me of my very favorite quote in your third and final book, which is called A Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander, Sarah Ishikawa, and Murray Silverstein. This is a complete masterwork. Took a decade in the making by them with a whole team of people. It published finally January 1st, 1977. Talk about a pub date. First day of the new year by Oxford University Press. This is no joke. It's a butter yellow cover on a thick, gigantic, like 1,159 page hardcover. I don't even know what I paid for this. Probably like $50. It's got the thinnest paper ever. And it says A Pattern Language. The name of this book is completely misleading. It's really how to design. It's like Sim City in 1977. It's like how to design a town 50 years ago. How far apart should everybody live? How tall should everybody's fence be? How high should everybody's windows be? Why should nothing be more than 4 stories? Why should old people live next to young people? And it's not just that, it's culturally. Why should there be an arcade? Why should there be a billiards hall? Why should there be a legion? What do these things do? Why should there be a night scene? Why is this good? I can see why this is formative to you. It is like a dense The guy got the first ever PhD in architecture from Harvard ever. And then he taught architecture at the University of California in Berkeley. And then at the end of his life in the 70s, he wrote like this definitive masterwork on how everything should be designed. Okay. It is an incredible, incredible book that I am going to be flipping through the rest of my life. You follow this one under 720.1 for arts/architecture/theory and instruction. Lindyman, tell us about your relationship with A Pattern Language, Towns, Buildings, Construction by Christopher Alexander et al.
Yeah, it's just like you mentioned. Someone takes architecture, community, towns from the ground up in excruciating detail. But it's not a bad read. Like there's pictures, the way he divides each section is very readable. And he utilizes a lot of, some of it is his preferences, but he has an interesting star system, which is if there's a certain number of stars, there's an ancient precedent, or at least a historical precedent for what he's talking about. And so you can actually go, okay, I want the most Lindy patterns for designing, from windows to the living room, to the bedroom, to the street, to how the building should look, to how the town should run. So you can go to like the 4 stars. And then he also adds his opinion at like the 1st or 2nd star, which is why he thinks, we should do this pattern, why we should put this door here, and or we should put the bathroom here.
It's got a bit of a that book with the red kettle on the front, The Art of Design.
Yeah.
It's got one of those a vibe of I'm at the end of my life. I got the most education in this topic than anyone. I've read everything there is to know, and here's how it should be done. Yeah,
and this book is part of being an architect. People read this. It's in schools. It's not completely alternative. It's mainstream.
Oh, okay.
But it is. But it is it. Like if you want a guide for designing a home, a community, a street, there it is. He discusses the historical precedents, and to me, it's
post research.
It's just there's some concepts that never occurred to me, like light on 2 sides, right? If you have an apartment or a home with windows on one side, it creates a cave-like feeling. But if you have a window on another wall, you have 2 windows, all of a sudden you feel like you're outside, and it completely changes how you feel in that room. And you'll gravitate toward being in that room more than the room that just has windows on one side. And it's just, he's right. I'm gravitating toward this specific spot of the house more. So there's all these concepts that are intuitive, but you never really see explained. And some things I disagree with a lot, but it just kind of opens your mind on how how you function in a space and how things should be designed. I think he dislikes courtyards that are enclosed because it feels and then he'll say nobody actually hangs out in these courtyards that are enclosed because it feels like everybody's watching you, and people need a little bit more privacy or something. And then you'd look out at courtyards that are enclosed, and you won't see a lot of people out there hanging out. And you're like, that may be it. He could be right on that. So he has, I don't know, it's a great guide to design.
Well, absolutely. And it gets right into the culture. And you're right. He kind of writes like you now. I didn't really notice this, but short paragraphs, lots of pictures, quote a bit of research, quote a little study. It's very readable. The thing that brought me into this book, it was a quote you had said about Antifragile, which is around age mixing. Principle 40 in this book is called Old People Everywhere. It's not written in a pretentious language. It's literally, the chapter title is Old People Everywhere. And on page 216, he writes, when elderly communities are too isolated or too large, they damage young and old alike. The young in other parts of town have no chance to benefit from older company, and the old people are far too isolated. He goes on, yeah. Contemporary society shunts old people, and the more shunted they are, the deeper the rift between old and young. The segregation of old causes the same rift inside each individual life. As old people pass into old age, communities, their ties with their own past become unacknowledged, lost, and broken. Their youth is no longer alive in their old age. They become dissociated. Their lives get cut in 2.
Yeah, that's a powerful quote. He's right. Yeah.
And, like Leslie and I were just talking earlier today about, I wish I had my mom in, like I realized, one generation ago, like my parents would be living with me right now.
Right.
To this day, I'm 45. My dad once in a while will say like, why don't you guys just move in with us? Like I'm married with kids in a downtown Toronto setting.
Yeah.
They live in the suburbs. He's 80 and he still suggests, maybe we should live together. And he mentions that the house near them was recently purchased and like 15 people moved in. You know what I mean? Like it's making a comeback,
right?
But I quoted this passage from this book this morning. We were talking about having my mom over. Here's a quote from the same page. She's quoting a 1945 book by Yale University Press called The Role of Aged in Primitive Society. He says, frequently the very young and the very old have been left together at home while the able-bodied have gone forth to earn the living. These oldsters, in their wisdom and experience, have protected and instructed the little ones, while the children have acted as the eyes, ears, hands, and feet of their feeble old friends.
Oh, that's a great quote. That's right. The thing is also there's like a
You're Greek. It's the same for you.
It's
you got an opa somewhere in the back there.
As a modern person, sometimes we want more space, right? Or we want more privacy, or we're okay with a little bit more alienation in the West. So there is a transformation that happens, I think, when you're in a society that what is your preference for privacy and space, right? So.
Well, you've been an active proponent of something I call Never Retire. I wrote a book in 2016, it's right behind me, called The Happiness Equation. There's a whole chapter in there I call Never Retire. You've been a proponent of this. And of course, one of the most fascinating graphs, I don't know if you've seen this, is a table throughout the 20th century that shows the percentage of people over age 65 who choose to voluntarily retire. And it goes from like 9% in like the late 1800s to like 95% in like the 2000s. Because in the 50s, insurance companies marketed retirement as a thing you earn for a lifetime of hard work. And they create Sunshine State, Arizona, Florida kind of retirement communities, completely annexing and cutting off old from young.
Right.
So now we have an upwardly mobile society where the busiest day on the airlines is Thanksgiving because everyone's going home to see their parents.
Yeah.
Who they no longer even live near.
Yeah, I mean, modern cities now are generally playgrounds for the young before they move to the suburbs and sort of the wealthy. And so like that's just accelerating over time. If you're in New York or DC or Boston, like you'll see families here and there, but a lot of the times you'll just see, generally younger people living there until they kind of rotate toward the suburbs. So that is an issue. We're kind of always around young people, then you're around families in the suburbs, then you're retiring around people your age. So you're always just in this category of people your own age your entire time. And there's like less mixing.
Well, this is the problem with colleges. Leslie was experiencing some anxiety in college. She called her parents and they said, volunteer for an old folks home or a kindergarten classroom. She did that and she found her anxiety dissolved. She had to puncture the college bubble as a way to increase her mental health.
Yeah.
I have a couple more things to ask you about this incredible book. You're from Chicago, right? Like a lot of people listening have maybe taken that Chicago boat tour, with all the architecture, the tallest buildings. You can see how they're built. It's an incredible tour. If you haven't done it, I highly recommend it. And I thought I saw your tweet yesterday about, someone who lives in New York saying, I love Roosevelt Island, and I was just thinking, on page 115, and I live in Toronto, we're number one on the Crane Index. Like we are getting more skyscrapers built here than anywhere. And page 115 says, there is abundant evidence to show high buildings make people crazy. And they go on and on. High buildings have no genuine advantage except in speculative gains for banks and landowners. They are not cheaper. They do not help create open space. They destroy the townscape. They destroy social life. They promote crime. They make it life difficult for children. They are expensive to maintain. They wreck open space near them. They damage light. They damage air. They damage view. And apart from all this, empirical evidence shows they actually damage people's minds and feelings. And the book prescribes a mandatory 4-story limit for any development of any city.
Yeah, I mean, I agree a little bit with that. I mean, you ever walk around Manhattan, you don't really feel cozy. I mean, it's kind of feel like daunting, like you're like an insect.
Unlike Paris, which is probably the best
Yeah,
walking
I think
city
ideally
in the world.
you take lower, maybe 9. I don't know, 4 seems pretty low, but maybe 9 stories, and then you just create these clusters of density and just recreate this neighborhood. Just keep it going, and that way you never have to sort of bunch people into like these skyscraper type places, because you're just always you're kind of copying kind of neighborhood density at as much
it
as
even
you
shows that we live in it shows that we live in tribes of 7,000.
Yeah.
Robin Dunbar, who was our guest last year on the show, way back in chapter 132, he says it's always in multiples of 3. You have 3 closest friends, and you've got 15 shoulders to cry on friends. It goes up to 150 kind of two-way relationship friends, 500 acquaintances. And then he multiplies up 5,000 is the number of faces you can remember, 15,000 is the number of group. So he shows that we have a cognitive limit for living like this. And in fact, there was an urban planning report just published in the Toronto Star as I talked to you today, saying new study shows Ontario does not need bigger cities. It just needs more cities, which I thought was a really interesting way of putting it. And Leslie and I just got back from Mexico City, where no buildings are tall because they built the whole city on a lake. So everything's going down a couple inches every year. They can't build up. It will just, there's water underneath it, So I thought this was fascinating. It's so the opposite of what's happening to my city and most cities right now. Everything's becoming a Shanghai.
Right. I think it's just easier to build these gigantic towers.
But people don't prefer living there. And in fact,
I don't
really
think so.
hurts our mental health.
Where do people go on vacation? Like, that's where people prefer to live. Like, in a way, these cities in Europe or these small towns, I think that's where people we should be recreating. But,
Mm-hmm. Any cities doing it right now?
Well, I think most in Europe are great to be in because they're built before, modern times, when they could build at such high density, or they have all these this very ornate, pleasant places to live, and it was taken with these these traditions. So I think there's a reason why, but I don't think we can build them again. So I think we have trouble building new cities or new neighborhoods. So it's one of the problems with kind of modern life, is the places that are really nice are very, very expensive. It's very hard for us to create like new places that are enjoyable and beautiful.
Yeah. And maybe that's why the density here is skyrocketing where I live, because it isn't as much like those, like people are drawn to. We've got hiking trails. We've got lakes. We've got 2 million lakes. We've got more lakes in Canada than any other country in the world combined.
Yeah.
So, people are drawn to the place. Whether it's a cottage, you have the opportunity for a lake house. You have a place you can relax by the beach. That's that mentality that Canada has 100 square kilometers per person, right? Just if you do the math. So, arguably it makes it more desirable, but interesting dynamics at play. Of course, you can't say the things I'm saying because you get labeled like a NIMBY who doesn't like density.
Yeah. Well, the problem with is that the YIMBYs is that all density is good, and there's no discretion for style or for how a human can live, right? It's just shove as many people in there as possible, and that's what their argument is, right? So, but nope, there's other considerations here if you want to do this correctly, but I think it's very difficult to do it correctly.
So you've taken us through a over 2,000-year-old book of aphorisms from a slave term playwright in the Roman Empire, a guy who quotes all this stuff in his writing over time and longevity, who popularized the Lindy Effect, and a pattern language, which is also a 50-year-old book drawing upon thousands of years of history and research. There's a real connection here between the stuff you read. It's almost counterintuitive considering how prominent you are on Twitter.
Why is it counterintuitive?
But to me, it's like I would picture someone like that just like being in a library all day.
I think it's nice. I think there's lots of ways to get information quickly now, so you don't necessarily need I've read this. Thankfully,
like Twitter's not Lindy.
Yeah, but I think the style of writing is, and I think text in a way is I think text in a way is easier to remember than video, and even probably audio. Although I think audio can compete with text pretty well, but I think really text hits hard. Text somehow can get people to remember things from years ago in a way that other forms of media cannot, especially in that sentence style.
Completely agree. Yeah. Completely agree.
And
text is easier to remember than video. This is a show that espouses books.
Right.
We have detailed 10-page long show notes for every single show. We have all the quotes pulled out. We have all the things mentioned pulled out. We have I write a big blog post for everyone. I believe in the long-termification of text.
I also came of age before social media, so I read a lot more. So I read all these stuff before I kind of became locked into this world we're in now, where actually reading is harder to do because there's so many options, and also there's life. So there's an advantage to being a little older, not too old, but just being a little older in I think today.
We're the last generation that will know life before the internet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And weirdly, you said before I got locked in, and if I could, as a friend, say, for now, because, you did tweet pretty recently that reading is dead.
Books.
You actually said that. You said books are dead. Until we get to the other side of this.
The other side. What's the other side? I mean, I don't know what the other side is, but I don't think this is sustainable. I don't think everybody on these few apps just spending all their day scrolling on infinite scroll. I mean, I think I don't think this is a good way to, structure society, and certain people owning the algorithm and can put that into your face. Opposite. I think there's going to be.
You can still read books.
No, I do, but I think it's going to take another shift to get us back to more literacy. I think we're going through another time right now, but I think books and literacy are going to come back in another form.
Do you think we're going through a moment of illiteracy?
Yeah, I think we're going through real transformation in how we consume and live, and I think in a way we're gonna get off of these. Somehow we're gonna get off of these, and we're gonna go back to kind of like where we were 100 years ago, but with technology. I don't know what it's gonna look like, but yeah.
This is partly why I'm so drawn to your work, is that you get to this amazing place of looking really far in the back mirror.
Yeah.
And then you get to a place of trying to apply it to the front mirror, and you both do it and are smart enough to say, and I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't like
don't use mouthwash. I'm good with floss. And as for all the other stuff, I don't know.
Yeah, it's important. Not a lot of people say, I don't know, right? Everyone has an answer, but a lot of times you don't know. So,
Hey, listen, this guy wrote 1,159 page book. You are similarly productive. Like I've subscribed to your newsletter. You are writing a gigantic, long form, researched with images piece.
That's important too. Images are important.
You're doing that 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah.
How are you doing this? How are you writing so heavily and so frequently long form journalism? You are writing, if it was a newspaper, you're writing a long feature 2 or 3 times a week.
It's 4 to 5 hours of directed creative work every day, no days off. And you kind of follow what stimulates you. And then you kind of use a pattern, which is you go back, you go forward, and and then you go back to the present. And the good thing is we have all this kind of media around us. So people enjoy, with an image with text or video with text, so you can just kind of put that in there to help support your argument. But generally, it's just I think when you have an angle, you just follow that angle, and that's what I do. So, but it's interesting. It interests me, and I just follow that interesting kind of route.
Okay, I'm going to close this conversation, this very stimulating conversation with Lindyman Paul Skallas, with some fast money round questions to help close us off. Hardcover, paperback, audio, or
Paperback.
How do you organize your books on your bookshelf?
Random.
What's your favorite bookstore, living or dead?
Oh, favorite bookstore. What's that place in New York? So nice. Fuck, I forget.
The Strand?
Yeah, Strand.
Or Ben McNally?
No, it's Strand. I like Strand.
Yeah. What's your book lending policy?
My book lending policy. I try not to give some, as far as like the interest in the person or as like the time.
Yeah. Either.
I try to match the person's personality with what they're asking for with. Sometimes I get DMs of like, hey, what do you think I should be reading? And then I ask them like, what are you into? So I just try to match interests with something I've read before that I know is good.
You are a successful writer. I know you brandish the label technology lawyer. However, what I see as someone who is living a flaneur lifestyle in multiple cities around the world with an incredibly quick to distill, acute trend spotting and trend articulation through this heuristic of the Lindy effect, I'm like, you're a writer. That's how I, no offense to the technology lawyer side, but I see you as like a very prominent writer, and you're selling your writing. That's a very important point. You actually sell your writing. You cannot read Paul Skallas for free. You can read Paul Skallas on Twitter for free, but all your articles are never for free anywhere. You have to pay. And I followed you for a long time before I started paying you, right? Like I was like, I have to know how this ends, And it's like, how much does it cost? Like, is it like $5 a month or something? So you had to make a choice about how much you're going to charge. Presumably you have hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people who pay you. And therefore that provides a salary, which therefore provides an income. So I guess I'm wondering what your writing advice is.
Oh, God. I don't know. I mean, don't take any advice on writing. I think that's my writing advice, honestly, because I never approached anybody with advice on writing. And I think you just develop your own style and you live and die with that style. And anything else just makes your writing into something else. But I consume to create. So I'm always, if I have one piece of advice, it's always be sensitive to see what excites you. When you're just browsing the newspapers, the blogs, the tweets, the books, just be sensitive to what, because then that's what your audience is going to like. Because eventually, once you have an audience, the pathway is, this is interesting to me, and the side effect is the audience will find it interesting. So it all goes through what you think is interesting. And I think if you try to get funny with, I think this is what my audience will like, you break that connection, and something goes wrong or will go wrong in the future. Once you think you can outsmart, once you think like, oh, I think the audience would love this, even though I don't like this. So yeah, I guess that's the only advice. But his writing style, I don't know.
Paul Skallas, Lindyman. I am one of the 129,000 people who follow and look forward to your original thoughts on applying the Lindy Effect heuristic to our complicated, overwhelming cacophony of noise that we call today's civilization. It is a real treat and pleasure to hear your thinking out loud through the lens of my heuristic, which is 3 most formative books. And always be sensitive to what excites you. Take lessons from the past and apply them to today for guidance. It is a real honor and pleasure to have you on 3 books. Thank you so much for doing this and for the generous gifts of so much of your time and your thoughts today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Leo. It's a pleasure speaking to you. It was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Hey everybody, it's just me, just Neil again, hanging back in my basement. My wires and my microphone. I'm in my office this time. I'm trying to record video for it. I don't know. I oscillate between video and non-video. We did video for Nick Sweetman in chapter 144, and like that was a banger job, right? Like we did documentary with time lapses and all this footage, but it also took us a month of work to do it. And kudos to incredible editors and videographers and filmmakers along the way, but they also cost a lot of money to do all that too. So I actually really respect the podcasters who are going full video, because now that I've gone down to like LA and hung out with Rich Roll and I see his like 22 camera setup and his 6 full-time editors and his, 4 people working on Instagram reels and all this stuff, I'm like, dude, this is a lot of work. I mean, it's kind of like a TV show, right? So I oscillate between them. Well, this is an interesting conversation, don't you think? What'd you think of Lindyman? What'd you think of Paul Skallas? He hasn't really done a lot of podcasts, but I find him so intriguing, and his perspective it's hard to discern between what to take from history, but so many interesting thoughts. I like the last advice. Always be sensitive to what excites you, right? Or how about his quote, talent goes where the money is. Or his quote, it's very tempting to mediate reality through a computer screen. This point really took me a while, but as he was talking, the longer something survives, the less the survivorship bias. So basically, you have the tendency amongst things that last to overinflate their propensity to be strong or successful things. But the longer it's lasted, then it's not just survivorship. Now it's like legitimacy. Like now it's like quality. And now it's like stood the test of time, which is more than just kind of being biased towards something that's lasted over a short time. That's an interesting one. I like his quote here. I do 4 to 5 hours of directive creative work every day. You know what? For all the creators out there, all the writers, like there it is. Like there's the secret sauce. Like I do 4 to 5 hours of directed creative work every day. This guy is, yes, he's been on Twitter a lot. Like I quoted like the 16 tweets in the last 24 hours. But if you look at the timelines, it was clear that he was like on Twitter deeply for like a couple hours one day, and then off it for like 22 hours, and then like on Twitter deeply for like a couple hours another day, and then off it deeply. And it's clear to me that he's also using Twitter as his writing aid. It is his Evernote. It is his Scrivener file. He is constantly attaching tweets and things he sees to old strings from a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And when the strings get long enough through this intriguing note-taking process, he then writes it up into an article. And then, of course, does more research along the way. So you get these really detailed combinations of writing and images, tweets and graphs and research, all folded in together that naturally appeals to the way that people's brains want to consume information. It made the point that he said kind of interesting to me, where he said, I think people remember text better than they remember video, maybe because text has experienced more generational churn. That other phrase he talked about, that only true generational churn creates powerful Lindy things. Like TikTok has not experienced generational churn yet. Snapchat maybe never will. Certainly MySpace and Friendster didn't, and ICQ. I mean, I was on MySpace and Friendster and ICQ when I was 18 and 19 and 20 on the internet. Those were my social media, and those were the ways I talked to my friends. I literally used ICQ all the time in first year university, but there is no generational churn, Now no one uses it. So like what has that and what doesn't? Like what a cool lens to filter stuff through. Makes me feel happy for flossing. And thank you so much to Paul Lindyman Skallas for adding 3 more books to our top 1,000. Oh yes, I am talking about number 577, The Moral Sayings of Publius Syrus. I cannot recommend this pamphlet book enough. I mean, it stood 2,000 years for a reason. Then number 576, Antifragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. I have been back-pocketing The Black Swan as one of my 3 most formative books, maybe to do in the last ever chapter or something. And because The Black Swan taught me that life works best when you make small bets on lots of things. Make a small bet on a podcast and a newsletter and a speaking career and a blog post and writing a book. Well, one of those things hopefully will work. Like it will experience the Black Swan effect. I got a Black Swan with the popularity of the Book of Awesome in 2010, and arguably again in 2016 with The Happiness Equation. Have my other 8 books sold nearly as well as those 2? Not even close. But, for the Book of Awesome, somebody at TEDx Toronto asked me to do a TEDx Toronto talk. Then somebody at TED.com put it on their website. At the same time, 6,000 copies were printed in Canada, and Heather Reisman, the CEO of Indigo, made it a Heather's Pick, which sold 90,000 hardcovers in 3 months at her stores. So I cannot control the confluence of extrinsic factors that affect my behavior and the results of the things I do. However, I can make myself ripe for exposure to them by doing lots of little things and placing lots of small bets. That's the principle of the Black Swan, right? So then Antifragile comes along. I bought it. It's sat on my bedside table a long time. Like I said, it's very nutritively dense. It's like one of these intellectually overstimulating books. You can kind of see that it's from this like genius, almost ADHD, geniusy type of brain. But now with Lindyman's prompting, I revisited the book and read longer and thicker and deeper sections in depth, and it continues to blow me away. It's such a good way to think about life. How do you create post-traumatic growth in your life? How do you make yourself susceptible to kind of small shocks purposefully? Because those small shocks, small tears, and small failures actually open you up to stronger living, like the once a week or twice a week vegan fasting principle. So it's interesting how big this book really plays a role in my life, and obviously a lot of other people's, as it's still selling a lot of copies 13 years later. And then finally, his third most formative book is probably one I would wager that almost none of you have heard of. And I don't say that with any dismissiveness, more just like, who's reading a 1,300-page hardcover Oxford University Press book about architecture from the 70s? Yet that book is also offering a very long-term lens by which and how we live. It's an incredible book, reflecting back to what's working and what's not in our culture. It's amazing, as all three books are. Thank you so much to Lindyman for joining us on 3 Books, and thank you to all of you for listening. Did you make it past the 3-second pause? If so, I want to welcome you back to the end of the podcast club. This is one of 3 clubs we have for 3 Books listeners, including the Cover to Cover Club and the Secret Club. Let's kick off the end of the podcast club, the after party of the show, as we always do, by going to the phones. Here we go.
Hi, Neil. Happy New Year. My name's Diego. I'm calling from Yokohama, Japan, where I've lived for 20 years. I'm sorry, I'm kind of walking and talking. I just finished listening to your talk with David Sedaris. His choice of Tobias Wolff was amazing. I've read a couple of his collections, and actually when I finished one, I was so impressed by it that I found his email address, and I sent him an email saying, thanks for writing the book. And he replied back, and have an email that I'll always cherish. Anyway, if you want 3 formative books, On the Road by Kerouac. Don't know if it stands up today, but it got me into reading. The second one, Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway. It's about a 90-page novella. I think I've read it about 4 times. Just made me feel good about being able to read a Nobel Prize winner when I didn't have much confidence as a reader. And the last one, Knut Hamsun, Mysteries, which is a book I picked up at a second-hand bookshop in Sydney, where I'm from. And it's like a David Lynch movie. It was written in the late 1800s, I believe, and just read very contemporary and highly recommended if you haven't read it. Anyway, it's getting late over here in Japan. It's cold. And just thanks for all your podcasts. They're all great. Cheers. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much to Diego from Sydney by way of Japan. That's an incredible life you're living, over in Sydney. I'm picturing Steve Toltz over there, and I'm picturing, Dr. Ching Lee over in Japan, some of our past guests on the show. You know what? I love that you can email authors. This is something we talked about with Dave Barry back in chapter 9, that authors are the most accessible celebrity in the world. Like they're like you can't email a movie star, you can't email a musician, but you can email an author, and there's a 50% chance they'll write you back. Like, that's amazing. Tobias Wolff, by the way, is a dream guest for the show. I've approached him a couple times, and he's not written back. Tobias, if you're listening, come on 3 Books. It'd be a pleasure to talk to you. And I love your stuff as well. I love that On the Road got you into reading. That right away is the definition of a formative book, right? Like, it kind of gets you into reading. And I don't know if you've listened to chapter 94 with Dan the Tailor, but if you haven't, Daniel Torchman, we talk about On the Road. It's one of his 3 most formative books. Old Man and the Sea, I also felt that way, that exact same way of like, wow, I can read like a smart person book. That was first proposed to us as a formative book in chapter 24 with Jonathan Field, when interestingly, he read it or owned it in its original published capacity, which is not a 90-page novella, which is amazing, but it was like a feature short story in Life magazine. So like Life magazine, which was, I guess, like 100 pages or whatever, had like a 20-page insert in it of that whole book. Imagine reading a whole book in the middle of a magazine. Like, it just speaks to like what magazines used to do. I think magazines, by the way, are very Lindy, don't you think? Like, I think so. There's a magazine store that's open till midnight in downtown Toronto, and they've recently moved from the main floor to the second floor because of exploding rents. And I just love the fact that you can still survive these days, albeit on the second floor of retail now, as a magazine store. Like, all they sell is magazines. But I read an article, an interview with, Bill Gates back in the early 90s. And he said, I go to magazine stores because inevitably they're deep subject matter experts on a topic I know nothing about. By picking up a magazine on like woodworking or birdwatching or stereophiliac, people are obsessed with stereos, or I just learned so much about a topic in detail. And it's a wonderful way to explore my curiosity. And because magazines still offer that, yet are now combined with the increasingly value curation, you know what I mean? Like, in an era of infinite choice, the value of curation skyrockets. That sort of doubly makes them important. And I think there's a lot more stuff you could do with like size and format and print. I love Spacey magazine, which is sideways. I love Interview magazine, which is super tall. I love what magazines are doing as they constantly reinvent themselves. And I like to have one magazine subscription per year just to support the form and the medium. I don't want it to distract from my book reading, so I usually just have one. For a while, I was getting Bust magazine after chapter 4 with Sarah Ramsey. And of course, interviewing Debbie Stoller way back in chapter 20, who was the editor of Bust magazine. Then I was getting the Atlantic for a while. Then I was getting the New Yorker for a while. And now I'm open. I need a new magazine. Does anyone subscribe to a paper magazine that you recommend? Give me a call at 1-833-READ-A-LOT. And by the way, Diego, the last book that you recommended was one I've never heard of. It's called Mysteries, as you said, by Knut Hamsun, Hamsun. On Goodreads, it says, in a Norwegian coastal town, society's carefully woven threads begin to unravel when an unsettling stranger named Johan arrives. With an often brutal insight into human nature, Nagel draws out the townsfolk, exposing their darkest instincts and suppressed desires. Okay, this sounds interesting. It was published in 1892. 1892. It's Lindy, people. It's Lindy. It made it through 100 years and still getting word of mouth recommendations through generational transfer. It's working. It's very Lindy. So thank you so much, Diego. And hey, if you're listening to this right now, you made it. You're at the end of the show. You are part of our inner sanctum, our inner circle. Like, no one gets here that isn't part of this love fest, right? I love you. I love you. I love you. I really appreciate you, your time, your energy, your ears. I love your notes, your messages. Please give me a call. There's no... you can't do it wrong. If you do, just call it back again and try again. Like, I'm not going to embarrass anybody. 1-833-READ-A-LOT, READALOT. Should work from everywhere in the world. Leave me one of your formative books or a dream guest or a reflection or something you agreed with or disagreed with from one of the chapters. I love hearing from you. It's my greatest joy. Thank you so much for calling me. Now, we've already done a letter. I guess we could do another one. It's getting a little self-indulgent here. Let's go to the word of the chapter. And for this chapter's word, let's, of course, go back to Lindyman himself.
Aphorisms, like La Bruyere, La Rochefoucauld.
Yes, indeed. The word is aphorers. Aphorers? Aphorers. Is that a real word?
Aphorist.
Okay, well, vocabulary.com seems to think aphorist is a word, APHORIST, which means someone who formulates aphorisms or who repeats aphorisms. Okay, what about you, Merriam-Webster?
Aphorism.
Well, you got aphorism over there, APHORISM. There's no reason if aphorism is a word and an aphorist is a word that an aphorer shouldn't be. Maybe he meant aphorist, but whatever. We'll go with the word that he invented. I like that word. What is an aphorism, by the way? It is a concise statement of a principle, or it is a terse formulation of a truth or a sentiment. For example, a high-minded aphorism might be, let us value the quality of life, not the quantity. Or, this is the third definition, which is kind of interesting. It's also an ingeniously terse style of an expression. For example, aphoristic language. A quote mentioned is, there are dazzling chapters packed with perfectly chosen anecdotes, pithy with aphorism. Okay, well, that one's getting to the sort of like pithy nature of it, or the ingeniously terse style of it, which for sure Nassim Taleb writes in, for sure Lindyman writes in, for sure Publius Syrus writes in. Where did it come from? Actually, interestingly, the word aphorism comes from Lindyman's own heritage. That would be the Greek physician Hippocrates. Hippocrates, often considered the father of modern medicine, created the word aphorismos, which is a Greek ancestor of aphorism, entitling a book outlining his principles on the diagnosis and treatment of disease. Okay, when you open that book, Hippocrates' book, very Lindy, he writes in the book's introduction, here's the first sentence. You heard some of it before. Ready? Here it is. It's an aphorism. Ready? Life is short, art long, occasion sudden and dangerous, experience deceitful, judgment difficult. Like, that's the whole sentence. Life is short, art long, occasion sudden and dangerous, experience deceitful, judgment difficult. Like, declaring 6 things to be specifically one way, that is aphoristic. You are an aphorer, Hippocrates and Lindyman. Now, it says here, English speakers originally used the term mainly in the realm of the physical sciences, but they eventually broadened it to cover principles in other fields. Look, you could call this wisdom, you could call it one-liners, you could call it like life's little instruction book, but I think Lindyman's point is that, you know, to filter signal from noise these days, we have to have techniques. One of my techniques is the limiting of 3 formative books, 1,000 formative books total. 333 chapters. Like, that kind of guarantees me good ones because I'm asking interesting people which 3 books most changed their life. So that's a way I'm trying to use a filter to kind of pump signal over noise. And aphorisms sort of do the same. They are quick and distilled morsels of wisdom meant to provide hyperlinks, for lack of better words, into vast sums of human knowledge in a quick way. You're thinking quick? That wasn't quick. It was 2 hours together. This is different, man. It's pleasure too. We're hanging out at the parks. We're walking down the street together. We're in basement gyms together. I'm with you on your flight, and you're walking in your kitchen while you do the dishes, and you're with me. It's been a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for hanging out with me on chapter 145 of 3 books. And until next time, remember that you are what you eat, and you are what you read. Keep turning that page, everybody. And I'll talk to you soon.